we found
Wow. Hey, much love and respect to everybody that's tuned in. Thank you for being here once again. Today, I just wanted to go ahead and continue reading from this book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America. We're gonna go into chapter 5 today. We're gonna continue reading the book, get into chapter 5. Before I do that today, though, for a lot of the new people, I'm just gonna go over some information that we've gone over before. We're gonna get it like it's the first time when it comes to the Dutch and Sephardic Jews, right? And Moors, who eventually became new Christians, or crypto Jews, or crypto Muslims, Huguenots, Protestants, Quakers, Pilgrims, colonists, and all that. All right, so hope you guys enjoyed today's video. It's not going to be a quick one, all right? It's going to have some great information. And again, we're going to recap on some of the old information when it comes to the Dutch. Who is these so-called Dutch? And who were they before they got to New York, the New York colony? New York, New Rochelle. All right. So remember, you see a global market here, a lot of families connecting, a lot of people from a lot of people with the same cultural background in different locations of the world. And all these people, a lot of them are colonizing, they become settlers and prominent people in these places in America. Just want to show you another example here real quick. I'm in the Detroit Jewish News Digital Archives. All right, the Detroit Jewish News. And I'm in this page of this paper. Let me see, this is from the Detroit Jewish News, Friday, December 5th, 1969. Let me zoom into this part right here. All right, it says, fascinating mulatto Jew, a mulatto Jew story in Marcus, New York. All right, it says, in 1668, Boston reported the arrival and arrest of a Jew named Solomon. He was caught in the town of Wenham, Massachusetts, on his way to New Hampshire and Maine. His crime, he had profaned the Lord's Day by traveling on a Sunday. Who was Solomon? All we know is that he was described as a mulatto Jew, all right? But was he actually a mulatto? The Englishmen of that day thought of the Jews as a dark-skinned people. So why did the Englishmen of that day think of the Jews as a dark-skinned people? Well, we already got all the correlation. Well, we already know why. In 1665, 3 years before Solomon was hauled before the magistrates in Wenham, a respectable Portuguese Jew, I remember what they said about the Portuguese Jews, they were very dark-skinned. On Jamaica, a landowner was referred to as a black Jew. This Portuguese Jew was being referred to as what? As a black Jew. It is by no means improbable that the term mulatto was occasionally applied to Spanish Portuguese Jews. All right, mulatto was applied to them, Spanish Portuguese Jews, especially by people who had never seen a Jew before, right? This doesn't mean they were African or mixed with African. It's what they're letting you know. Just being Spanish and Portuguese Jew will declare you a mulatto. It says, as late as 1733, a verse in an English drama ran as follows. Farewell, Mr. Good Jew. Now I hate your tawny face. I'll have no more to do with any of your race. It says tawny people were dark-skinned people. Tawny, were dark-skinned people. Benjamin Franklin believed that most of the world was tawny. All right, Benjamin Franklin, we got that already. Remember, we got him his own words. He included in the category not only Africans, but Asians and American Indians as being what? Tawny or dark-skinned. Remember, Benjamin Franklin, we got the source in the past videos. Go get that drop. But also Italians. Our Italians were dark-skinned as well. French were dark-skinned. Russians were dark-skinned. Swedes and all the Germans except the Saxons were all what? dark skin. The French, Huguenots, French, Russians, Rus, the Mongols, the original Mongols are actually Russian aboriginals, indigenous people, the Rus. The Saxons and the English, he wrote in 1751, are the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. All right, so again, that was Benjamin Franklin they're quoting, all right, in this newspaper. Although Solomon of Massachusetts may well have been a white man of Spanish-Portuguese origin, this is not to imply that there were not genuine mulattoes among the Jews of the generation. So again, they're like, well, he might have been white still. They just call him a mulatto. No, you don't know. You weren't there. You don't know him. You just want to say that might have been. That means you don't know. May well have been. That's a lot of probabilities and conjecture right there, newspaper. All right. The fact is, he was labeled a mulatto Jew at that time. The people at that time called him a mulatto for a reason. But they're also letting us know in this newspaper not to imply that there were not genuine mulattoes among the Jews of that generation. Jews in the West Indies and in Dutch Guiana fathered many mulatto children who reared in the Jewish faith. All right, so they're trying to explain why they were mulatto. But again, all right, we already know these people are already dark skinned. All right, so again, just to continue with Solomon Franco, just want to show you what type of Jew they're letting us know here in the Sephardic community of Greater Boston. So it's SephardicBoston.com website. It says history, Sephardic community of Greater Boston, the Sephardim, the first Jewish community to reach America in 1492, the first, all right, with Christopher Columbus, have been living in Boston for over 350 years. They arrived there on the same time as the city of Boston was incorporated in the year 1630. Spanish and Portuguese Jews, we already know what they mostly look like. Escaping the Inquisition and persecution, settled throughout the English colonies, regaining their freedom of religion and building their homes and businesses. The first documented Jew in Boston was Solomon Franco, a Sephardic Jew. All right, Solomon, the guy they were calling mulatto, the guy that we know they were labeling as mulatto in that newspaper. He was a Sephardic Jew from Holland. The Dutch who had arrived there, Sephardic Jew from Holland, were arrived in 1649. Among the famous patrons living in Boston was Moses Michael Hayes, a Portuguese Sephardi, also a swarthy person. He and his family left Newport for Boston ahead of the British attack in 1776, at the time that Boston was devastated by the physical and financial effects of the American Revolution. For the next 3 decades, Moses Hayes and his family would play key roles in establishing the financial and cultural institutions that would define post-revolutionary and 19th century Boston. He opened a shipping office in Boston and was among the first merchants. Again, merchants, they got the mercantile business going. They are the merchants, this global network, there to underwrite shipbuilding, trade, and insurance to newly opened Far Eastern markets. In 1784, Hayes becomes a founder and first depositor of the Massachusetts Bank, still doing business today as part of the Bank of America. All right, who? A Portuguese Sephardi person of color, so-called black man, black Jew, so-called Sephardi Jew. All right. He was an honorary member of the Boston Marine Society and founder of the Mass Mutual Fire Insurance Company and the Mass Marine Insurance Company. Moses Hayes was also active in a variety of civic projects. He donated subscriptions to beautifying the Boston Common, to building bridges and turnpikes, and to Harvard College. All right, so he played a prominent role. A little further down, it says in the 1870s, through the turn of the century, there was a group of primarily North African Sephardims who held Sephardic services in Zion's Holy Prophet of Israel, the Alfred A. Marcus Orthodox Synagogue in Boston's South End. They were using the Torah scroll dedicated by the famous Sephardic philanthropist Sir Moses Montefiore. All right, we know all these people of color because the Sephardis, we already got the drop, all right? Most of these people were swarthy. As the Jewish community started to migrate to the suburbs of Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, so did the Sephardim. They continued praying in the synagogues on Blue Hill Ave. All right, now anybody from Boston, I grew up there. I grew up in Dorchester. Today, Roxbury, they call in these suburbs. They were meant because the downtown area, you know, this is colonial times, so downtown area was downtown Boston, you know, and right outside of that was Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and other communities. Today, they're not suburbs. This is the hood. Today, this is the neighborhood. These are generally what you would call so-called black communities, or communities, minority communities, right, in these areas, even though there is people that are pale skinned living in these areas too, but the majority, and it has been known as the ghettos, right, in Boston. So again, the Blue Hill Avenue, famous, if you know about Blue Hill Avenue, that's the hood. And so again, where they end up, all these Sephardis. Now these same Sephardic Jews, we got the Alhambra decree, or the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal and their territories in 1492. All right, and because of that, a lot of those Sephardic Jews in the Netherlands, a lot of these Moors, as it says here, as a result of the Alhambra decree of 1492 and the Holy Office of the Inquisition, many Sephardim, Spanish and Portuguese Jews, remember, people of color, left the Iberian Peninsula at the end of the 15th century and throughout the 16th century in search of religious freedom. Some migrated to the newly independent Dutch provinces, which welcomed the Sephardic Jews. Many of the Jews who left for the Dutch provinces were crypto Jews, persons who had converted to Catholicism but continued to practice Judaism in secret. After they had settled in the safety of the Netherlands, many of them returned fully to practice of the Jewish religion. Many Jewish refugees came from Portugal. All right, Portuguese Jews were very dark skinned, remember, where Spanish Jews had fled after the Spanish Inquisition. All right, so a lot of them were Spanish though, but they were very still swarthy. Had been introduced in Spain in 1478, followed by the expulsions of the Jews from Spain in 1492. In 1497, the Portuguese forcibly converted all Jews in Portugal, including many who had returned to Judaism after fleeing Spain and its Inquisition. Following the establishment in 1536 of the Portuguese Inquisition, descendants of the Jews who had converted to Catholicism, dating back to a forced conversion in Spain in 1391, through the Portuguese forced conversion, were looked upon with great suspicion. In search for greater religious and economic freedoms, many crypto Jews left Portugal for places with more lenient religious legislation and opportunities where their unique skill set could thrive. Many left for Brazil, where Europeans were Portuguese speaking, and France. A couple of decades later, groups of crypto Jews started reaching the Dutch Republic. All right, so look where they ended up, some of the places. All right, we're going to focus on a couple. So migration to Amsterdam. Amsterdam became one of the most favored destinations in the Netherlands for Sephardic Jews. All right, Amsterdam. They became Dutch there because many of these refugees were traders. All right, remember all the way back in my trader Sephardi Sumerian video, how they were in charge of the trade, the Silk Roads and all that, the commerce. Amsterdam benefited greatly from their arrival because these people brought the trade with them. However, the reason to settle in Amsterdam was not merely voluntarily. Many crypto Jews, or Marranos, had been refused admission in trading centers like Middelburg and Haarlem. And because that ended up in Amsterdam, under the influence of Sephardic Jews, Amsterdam grew rapidly. Many Jews supported the House of Orange and were in return protected by the standholder. Alright, so real quick, just from this Wikipedia article, says history of the Jews in the Netherlands, right? Same place, Holland, all right? Now the Netherlands. Now I want to go to this part right here. It says the area now known as the Netherlands was once part of the Spanish Empire, right? Did you know that? It was part of the Spanish Empire. But in the 1581, the northern Dutch provinces declared independence. A principal motive was the wish to practice Protestant Christianity, all right? Protestant, all right? Who's also Protestants? Known Protestants. All right, now we're getting into Protestantism, right? We're talking about Jews, but now we're gonna get into a territory where Protestant was accepted. Remember the Huguenots, right? Remember the Huguenots were Protestants, so-called Protestants, right? And remember the Huguenots, before they were Protestants, they were Sephardic Jews and Moorish Muslims, all right? So you see now, all right, this is gonna all link up. Then forbidding under Spanish rule. So Protestant was forbidding in Spain and Portugal. Religious tolerance was effectively an important constitutional element of the newly independent state. This inevitably attracted the attention of Jews who were religiously oppressed in different parts of the world. In pursuit of religious freedoms, many Jews migrated to the Netherlands, where they flourished. They flourished there. The newly independent and tolerant Dutch provinces provided more favorable conditions for observant Jews to establish a community and to practice their religion openly. The rabbi of the Portuguese-Spanish synagogue in Amsterdam, still in use today, was Abraham Cohen, Pimentel. The services are still held in the Portuguese language. The Portuguese Jews migrated most notably to the city of Amsterdam. As they became established, they collectively brought new trading expertise, and connections, a global network to the city. They also brought navigation knowledge, Moors, right? And techniques from Portugal. From who? Where did they learn all that from? Which enabled the Netherlands to start competing in overseas trade with the Spanish and Portuguese colonies. All right. So even though we're in Wikipedia, this is very important what they just told you right there. All right. Who are these Dutch? Who are these pirates? Who established the West Indian Company? All right. So now I'm in this article. Right here is Sephardic immigration into the Dutch Republic, 1595 to 1672 by Jonathan Israel. The source is Studia Rosentaliana, volume 23, from 1989, pages 45 to 53. All right, this is a very scholarly, peer-reviewed book. Again, Sephardic immigration into the Dutch Republic by Jonathan Israel. But before outlining the factors behind and the phases of Sephardic immigration into the Dutch Republic, it is necessary to make the general point that the rise of Dutch Sephardic Jewry was based on its functions in international commerce, and that the Dutch Republic during the 17th century was the world's foremost trading entry port. All right, so you see why the Sephardics were kind of like attracted to that area, right? Because they were already kind of in that business of trading and being merchants, right? So that was a big commercial area, international commerce port right there. And, you know, that's why they were heading over there. From the 1590s down to the beginning of the 18th century, the Dutch Republic exerted the greater influence over the mechanisms of world trade than any state or nation had previously had. This fact is fundamental to understanding the beginnings and subsequent growth of Dutch Sephardic Jewry. All right, they were going over there for a main reason. For Sephardic immigrants were allowed to settle in those Dutch cities which accepted them. Above all, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Middelburg, essentially because they were regarded as economically useful, as bringing expertise and connections in spheres of commerce which were not yet established in the Dutch entrepot, but which were seen as important for its further expansion. The essential economic base on which the demographic, social, and cultural development of Dutch Sephardic Jewry rested was in fact quite narrowly defined. It consisted overwhelmingly of a small group of long-distance trades and restricted batch of mostly colonial commodities, of which sugar, spices, bullion, diamonds, and tobacco were the most important. Tobacco. These were the strands of commerce in which Sephardic emigres of Portuguese background were firmly enclosed owing to their role while living in Portugal as forced Christian converts during the 16th century in Portugal's long-distance traffic with Brazil, West Africa, and India. It is for these reasons that the onset of Sephardic immigration into the United Provinces from around 1595, and thus the origins of modern Dutch Jewry as a whole, are intimately and inseparably linked to the beginnings of Dutch primacy in long-distance rich trades during the 1590s. All right, so again, what they're trying to let you know is that at the same time as these Sephardic Jews are arriving in Holland, is when you can see the Dutch rise on these rich trades, as they're saying here. The fact that several quite substantial Sephardic merchants settled in Amsterdam with their wives and children during the mid-1590s before the arrival of the first group of immigrants who came direct from the sea from Portugal in 1597 seems to me to deserve a certain amount of emphasis. Hitherto, scholars have tended to emphasize the role of Portuguese New Christian immigrants fleeing from the Inquisition, migrating more or less directly from Portugal, and to de-emphasize the role of those Sephardic immigrants who arrived in Holland during the first quarter of a century or so from Germany, Italy, France, and Brazil. All right, so you see what they're telling you here, that these Sephardic Jews from Portugal or Spain, people of color, right? Remember, very dark Jews, were actually Some of them had settled in Germany, Italy, France, and Brazil before that, before they got to Holland. The stream of immigration from Portugal was, of course, the largest and demographically the most important component in the making of Dutch Sephardic Jewry. But it was not they who established Sephardic life on firm foundation in Holland. And it is arguable that also after 1597, the continuing stream of immigration from Antwerp, Germany, France, Brazil continued to play a disproportionately important formative role. So there were Sephardic Jews coming from all these places, even from Brazil. They were already in Brazil by then. They were getting kicked out of Brazil. They had to come back. Yeah, we're going to read about that. Economic factors, in other words, were paramount in shaping the early phases of Sephardic settlement in the Dutch Republic. And this immigration came from several different directions simultaneously. They started gathering up. You hear what they're telling you? The Sephardic Jews started gathering up in Holland and the Netherlands, becoming Dutch. And this is the book, The Jews and Moors in Spain, by Rabbi Jos Krauskopf. All right, with what we're talking about today, it says many of the Portuguese Jews settled and became prosperous in the Indies. All right, that's in the Americas. All right, Portuguese Jews, Sephardic Jews, right, people of color in southern France. All right, in southern France. All right, and from there they became known as Huguenots eventually, and in Hamburg. Others settled in the Netherlands, all right, in Holland, and became especially prosperous in Holland, very prosperous in Holland, all right. From Holland, large numbers of the descendants of the Portuguese and Spanish exiles entered England through the intercession of Manasseh ben Israel, all right. So from Holland, they would eventually reach England, all right. So remember now, eventually these people go from England to America. Now we forget about the whole trajectory. We just call them English or English Jews, right? But then there's a whole history behind these English Jews, right? They were in Holland, and then before that they were in Portugal. They were Sephardic Marranos, Moors, right? And they were expulsed. They had a whole history before they even got to the Americas, right? So this is what I'm trying to show you guys. So with the help of Manasseh ben Israel and Oliver Cromwell from England and from the Indies and from Italy, they entered the United States. Right. Since we already understand a little bit of the expulsion of the Jews and the Moors from Spain and Portugal, this book is going to correlate something, that I read before. It says History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors, with a sketch of civilization which they achieved and imparted to Europe, by Henry Copy. So it's a very good book. We're just going to go to one part of the book. It's from 1892, printed in Boston. So I'm on page 445 of this book, and it starts, and over here it's talking about Christopher Columbus, what his name means, the Christ bearer. He brought the Christ, all right. He brought only evil to the Aborigines, and like an Inquisition, he thought that the Moorish civilization was only good. That was the only good. So it says here that his vessel was fitted out in that little port of Palos, which had lately been a Moorish port. Palos was a Moorish port. That's where he's coming from, Columbus, all right? His sailors were many of them men with Moorish blood in their veins, all right? His men, people on the ship were Moors. It has been asserted that when the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in south of France. Thousands went to the south of France, all right? Who afterwards, abhorring the Roman Catholic persecution, became Huguenots. They became what? Huguenots. Who? Moors. Became what? Huguenots. Sephardic Jews and Morisco, crypto Moors, became what? Huguenots in the south of France, and that of these many emigrated at a later date to South Carolina. Be that as it may, the Spaniards had found for the world a virgin land in which to introduce Spanish errors and especially Spanish bigotry, and the great tide rushed in from Protestant Europe to occupy Protestant Europe. Protestants. All right, so again, these same Moors and Jews, they eventually became Huguenots. It says here, so you can understand where we're getting all this information, this correlation from. If we know that Sephardic peoples and Moors of Spain were people of color, it makes sense, Moorish blood. Huguenot merchants in the Protestant International in the 17th century. Same time, during the same time. The Protestant International? By J.B. Bosher, the William and Mary Quarterly, Volume 52, Number 1, from January 1995, pages 77 to 102. Again, Huguenot merchants and the Protestant International. Remember, a lot of these Sephardic Jews were Protestants, They were just practicing that in secret, but they were secret Jews and Moors, cryptos. The Reformation of the 16th century created religious conflict in France that lasted for 2 centuries, and in some respects even longer. In the 17th century phase of this conflict, church and state made efforts to destroy the Calvinist heresy that had taken root in the kingdom. A vigorous Roman Catholic resurgence, the Counter-Reformation, gave these efforts great force. Consequently, several waves of emigration brought Huguenots to Protestant parts of Europe. The word refugee, just like the Sephardic Jews were being called refugees, was invented to describe them. Refugee was invented for the Huguenots. Some of them found their way to the English colonies of North America, particularly after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. By then, large communities of French-speaking Protestant refugees had gathered in the Dutch Republic. All right, they already were in the Dutch Republic. Why? And who was also there? Sephardic Jews, right? The Dutch. They brought prosperity during the same time. These Jews, and though the Huguenots were also going there, Huguenots possibly ex-Sephardic Jews, ex-Muslim Moors. So they're just meeting up with their ancestors, their cousins, their families that were already in Dutch there as Sephardic Jews. The first French church in London was established in 1550. The refugees who left France in the generations that settled in America were not only joining the Protestant colonies of English North America, but were also joining a cosmopolitan diaspora, a Protestant international, a diaspora, just like the Sephardic Jews and Moors. All right, so I hope you guys following along. So far, see the similarities within these people. We know that the Sephardi Jews, a lot of them ended up and were very successful in their commerce and business in Holland and the Dutch Republic, which also happened to be one of the places where the Huguenots were able to go after they were refugees and become very successful too. As it says here from the Brigham Young University, Le Grand Arche des Fugitives, Huguenots in the Dutch Republic after 1685 by Michael Joseph Walker from the Brigham Young University, Provo. And right here, page 14 of this book, article says resettlement in the Netherlands was somewhat more successful for the Huguenots than in the British Isles. In both locations were the most receptive as compared to anywhere else because of cultural and linguistic structures provided by the pre-existing Walloon churches. The greater number of Huguenots settled in the Dutch Republic as opposed to any other single place. In the Netherlands, the Huguenots retained their separate culture and identity for the longest time of any of the areas of resettlement, arguably into the 19th century. However, they also managed to be integrated into Dutch society. The Huguenots were attractive to the Dutch because of their skills importing in the Dutch economy. Doesn't that sound like how they were also allowing the Sephardic Jews to settle in Amsterdam and all these places because they were going to be so important to the economy as well? And also their Reformed religion, which matched so well the religion of the Dutch Reformed Church. Indeed, the Dutch communities to which the Huguenots fled greatly benefited from the additional talent, wealth, and devotion these refugees brought and generated refugees, just like Sephardic Jews. Alice Clare Carter suggests that the Dutch readily accepted and invited skilled, talented, or wealthy foreigners. She argues that while other countries were rejecting religious diversity, the Netherlands, especially Amsterdam, embraced the skilled individuals who helped create the Dutch Golden Age, regardless of religious confession. However, the religious confession of the Huguenots happened to match very closely the sentiments of the Dutch Reformed Church, making them even more attractive than other sorts of refugees. Amsterdam was a city where toleration flourished. Remember that Amsterdam, many Sephardic Jews were prospering there and had control of the commerce in Amsterdam. And also, so these Huguenots, if they wanted to do business, they had to do business with the Jews, basically their own people from ancient times in Spain and Portugal, and also provided a ready market for their Huguenot refugee industrial skills. The Huguenots enriched the communities where they made new homes. Their commitments to the new communities left a lasting cultural impact where they settled. In fact, the most skilled Huguenots migrated to the Netherlands because the Dutch Republic found quick use for their skills. Various cities even competed with each other in the Republic to attract the most skilled refugees. William III of Orange also encouraged the towns to support the Huguenots as part of his effort to gain political favor amongst Protestants around the Republic and England and to combat the policies of his political opponent Louis XIV. Furthermore, the states of Holland offered generous funds which also served as propaganda against France and emboldened the Dutch to help Huguenot refugees. The Dutch army also benefited from the Huguenot exodus from France, as Louis XIV had previously employed Huguenots as soldiers and officers. All right, so that was just a little quick thing. Just wanted you to see that, yeah, they were also Huguenots, just like Sephardic Jews became very prosperous and were settling in Holland and becoming Dutch citizens, all right, blending in. All right, just want to show an example of one of these Sephardic Jews that ended up in Holland and became known, became very popular there in history, and as a Dutch Jew. His name is Benedict de Spinoza. We're in the Britannica.com website encyclopedia. It says Benedict de Spinoza, Hebrew forename Baruch, Latin forename Benedictus, Portuguese Bento de Spinoza. Born November 24, 1632 in Amsterdam, died February 21st, 1677, The Hague. Dutch Jewish philosopher. All right, again, Dutch Jewish philosopher, one of the foremost exponents of 17th century rationalism and one of the early and seminal figures of the Enlightenment. His masterwork is the treatise Ethics from 1677. So he's a Dutch Jewish. All right, so that kind of like leaves you like, so what does that mean? So we picture a certain type of Jew, right? Every time we grow up hearing like, oh, German Jew, Dutch Jew. All right, but what is he? All right. It says early life and career. Spinoza's Portuguese parents. All right, Portuguese, the Jews of Portuguese, we already know what complexion they were, right? Very swarthy, very dark, so-called black, were among many Jews who were forcibly converted to Christianity. His parents, but continued to practice Judaism in secret. See Marranos. All right, so they were Marranos. I remember Marranos. All right, we went over Marranos in many of my videos, the information before. After being arrested, tortured, and condemned by the Inquisition in Portugal, they escaped to Amsterdam, where Spinoza's father, Michael, became an important merchant. He became a merchant. Remember, they are heavily involved in the merchant business, all right, in trade. These Jews, all right, since ancient times, and eventually served as one of the directors of the city's synagogue. Spinoza's mother, Hannah, died in 1638, shortly before his birthday. All right, so they were Marranos, again, Marrano, British Encyclopedia in Spanish history, a Jew who converted to Christian faith to escape persecution, but who continued to practice Judaism secretly. Marranos, all right, Marranos. And we already know that these Jews were so-called black. All right, so Benedict, how can you prove that, Kurimeo? Because they got this fake picture of him here like they always do. All right, I'm going to show you something right here. All right, this is in archive.org. And it says this is Benedict de Spinoza, his life, correspondence, and ethics by Robert Willis. This is the publication date in 1870. All right, this is the title right here, Benedict de Spinoza again, by Robert Willis, MD, 1870. So we're going to go to page 71 in this book, and we're going to zoom in. And it says here, his personal appearance. All right, talking about Spinoza's personal appearance. It says in Calero's day, there were many persons still living at The Hague who had been well acquainted with Spinoza. They spoke of him as a man of middling height and slenderly built. His features were regular, his forehead broad and high, his eyes dark, large, and lustrous, his eyebrows black and bushy, his hair of the same hue, long and curly hair, and his complexion swarthy, black, so-called black, swart, black. His complexion is so-called black. All right, Benedict de Spinoza, this famous Dutch Jew, so-called Dutch Jew, is a Sephardic Jew. His parents were Portuguese. They were Iberian Moorish Jews, right? Moorish Jews. The whole physiognomy unmistakably proclaiming descent from the Jews of the southern peninsula. He looked just like them. Remember that the Jews from the southern peninsula were people of color, so-called very dark. They were describing them earlier, right? Very dark. So his personal appearance, complexion, swarthy. Show me that he was light-skinned. Prove that he was pale-skinned. All right? We already know. Corroborate. Put all the information together. Use your logic. All right? All this info. Who were these Dutch Jews and what role did they play? Yeah, again, so, Huguenots and Jews ending up in Holland, all right, at the same time being basically oppressed the same way. They had to flee. They had to practice their religion in secret, and then they had to fight for their freedom and religion. Just like so. There's a common thing here going on with the same people. Now, again, we're just gonna go over the same information. I know this is Wikipedia, but just to get it in your head, the history of the Jews in Amsterdam. Again, Amsterdam has historically been the center of Dutch Jewish community and has had continuing Jewish community for the last 370 years. Amsterdam is also known under the name Mokum, given to the city by its Jewish inhabitants. Mokum is Yiddish for town. All right, so they're talking about what kind of Jews. All right, so it says here Marrano and Sephardic Jews. Permanent Jewish life in Amsterdam began with the arrival. It began with what? The arrival of pockets of who? Marrano and Sephardic Jews. It wasn't Ashkenazi Jews. It was Marrano and Sephardic Jews first. At the end of the 16th and beginning of the 17th century, their first chief rabbi was Rabbi Udi Levi. Many Sephardic Jews from the Iberian Peninsula had been expelled from Spain in 1492 after the fall of Muslim Granada. Those that moved to Portugal were forced to leave in 1497, where they were given the choice between conversion or to Catholicism or death penalty on the grounds of heresy. From 1497, others remained in the Iberian Peninsula practicing Judaism secretly in their homes. The newly independent Dutch provinces provided an ideal opportunity for these crypto-Jews to re-establish themselves and practice their religion openly, and they migrated most notably to Amsterdam. Now remember, this was an open Protestant place. Collectively, they brought in economic growth and influence to the city as they established an international trading hub in Amsterdam during the 17th century. All right, they established what? An international trading global network. And the hub was in where? In Amsterdam. Dutch. Who was over there? Jews and Huguenots. During the 17th century, the so-called Dutch Golden Age, they helped with the Dutch Golden Age. Perhaps the most notable example of Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam are the Kurimeo family, named Geronimo Nunez da Costa, alias Moses Curio. All right, so the Costa, we already know that the Costas, we got some Irish da Costas who were actually Jewish. We got them in one of my videos, and they were listed as mulattoes in the census. All right, Irish mulattoes, Jews, son of Jacob Curiel. All right, so these are Sephardic Jews, basically. In 1593, Marrano Jews arrived in Amsterdam after having been refused admission to Middelburg and Haarlem. These Jews of converso descent were imported merchants. They were what? Merchants and persons of great ability. Their expertise, that can be stated, contributed materially to the prosperity of the Netherlands. All right, they became strenuous supporters of the contender House of Orange and were in return protected by the stadtholder. At this time, commerce in Holland was increasing. A period of development had arrived, particularly for Amsterdam. So all this is increasing while the Jews and Huguenots are arriving, right? To which Jews had carried their goods and from which they maintained their relations with foreign lands. Quite new for the Netherlands, they had also held connections with the Levant, Morocco, and the Caribbean allies. Morocco. All right, who? Sephardic Jews and their allies in Morocco, making Netherlands prosperous. It says here, by chance or choice, Jews in New Amsterdam, 1654. So it's going to tell us a little bit about, New Amsterdam. That's New York, right? And already we're going to read, Huguenots were already kind of there, settling in. Yeah, Dutch Huguenots, French Huguenots, yep, they were already there. But in around these 60s, 50s, the Jews were getting there. So it says that in late summer 1654, two ships anchored in New Amsterdam. Roadstead 1, that's New York, right, arrived from Amsterdam. So one of them came from Amsterdam on or about August 22nd. The other, a Dutch vessel named Saint Catherine, is often referred to as the French warship Saint Catherine of Saint Charles, yet only the name Saint Catherine appears in original records. Having entered a few days before September 7th from the West Indies. We actually got the same ship leaving. We got the story of them, what happened, why they had to leave from the West Indies, right? This is the other side of the story when they already had arrived in New York. The Periboom, Jan Piers Kettle skipper, left Amsterdam July 8 for London. Soon after peace negotiations in April concluded the First Anglo-Dutch War. Following the short stay in the Periboom sailed for New Amsterdam, again New York, where passengers and cargo were ferried ashore as there were no suitable docks or wharves. Among those who disembarked were Jacob Barsimon, probably together with Asir Levi and Solomon Petersen. These were the first known Jews to set foot in the Dutch settlement, and with them begins the story of what community is New York, so-called, all right? It says here, the rise of this Jewish community parallels the rise of the Republic they're talking about in Holland. The histories of the Dutch nation and of Jewish society are remarkably similar. Dutch nation. Who was the Dutch nation? if it's similar. The Netherlands, a small country, geographically achieved greatness while the Jewish community, small in number, also prospered and contributed significantly to the prosperity and growth of the country. In 1654, the arrival of the Pere boom and the St. Catherine reflected the accomplishment and ambitions of the Golden Age, the largely Protestant Dutch nation. All right, so these Dutch nation and Jewish society are remarkably similar. Protestant Dutch and Jews similar. Protestant Huguenot Protestants the large Protestant Dutch nation liberated itself from Spanish Catholic domination by the early 17th century. After an 8-year war of independence, as mentioned, the Utrecht Declaration of Tolerance and Religious Freedom attracted Jews to the Republic. They began arriving sometime before the 1597, the first Amsterdam congregation, Beth Jacob, House of Jacob, was established. Its synagogue opened in 1614, joining two others formed in 1604 and 1609. It was not that authorities or the people of the Netherlands gladly welcomed these largely Spanish, Portuguese, Sephardic Jews, or the East European Jews who joined them, particularly after 1648, but it was generally recognized by those like Ulseniks that members of this community, what community? Spanish, Portuguese, Sephardic Jews, what? They took part in the vital business activity of the East and West India Company's ventures, all right? They were heavily involved in that. That's what I was telling you. People of color. These are people of color. And were among the earliest 17th century contributors to the prosperity of the Netherlands in general and Amsterdam in particular. Officials in Amsterdam made certain such important citizens were not lured to neighboring and competing cities such as Haarlem or Leiden. All right, so Jews in New Amsterdam. But I just wanted to show that, the Huguenots are reportedly the first settlers in New Amsterdam, So again, they're joining again. They're in the same places, going through the same things, colonizing the same places. The Huguenots says here, the first settlers in the province of New York. Again, New Amsterdam, the Quarterly Journal of New York State Historical Society. Says it has been generally supported that the Dutch were the only settlers in New York entitled to very much consideration at the hands of the historians, but the Huguenots were first in the field and formed a very important element both in numbers and influence. The history of the Huguenots in the province of New York began in 1622 when certain Walloons petitioned the King of England for permission to settle in Virginia. The petition was not granted. About 2 months later, certain Walloons, probably the same person, petitioned the States General Holland for permission to settle in New Netherland, and the request was granted. In the spring of 1622, the West India Company equipped a vessel called the New Netherlands, of which Cornelius Jacobs was skipper with 30 families, mostly Walloons. They sailed by way of the Canaries and reached New Amsterdam, where they became the first permanent settlers. The first white child born in the province was of Huguenot parentage, right? So dodge the hijack because they're saying Huguenots are white. We know better than that. All right, so again, we're going to get into it. These people eventually settled in New Paltz, New York. At New Paltz, the church organized has always remained, and records have been translated and printed in book form. The Dutch language did not supersede the French until about 3/4 of the century. After the settlement, the church about the time began affiliated with the Dutch. So these French Huguenots were basically settled in New Paltz, New York. We're going to get somebody's ancestor that comes out of there, and that would be the Dubois family. The Dubois family, they settled. Those are some of those Huguenots that settled in New Paltz, New York, New Rochelle. So now I'm going to read from this book. It's from the American Jewish Archives. Sephardim in the Americas. Martin A. Cohen. Remember, John Calvin was a Cohen. It became Calvin, eventually Calvin. But it was a Cohen. Guest editor, it says. All right, this is the volume, the year, number 1. So we continue in this academic journal, the American Jewish Archives, Sephardim in the Americas. Portuguese Sephardim in the Americas says here in this chapter. It says Recife. The year was 1654. Now remember, we got a lot of this already in past videos. This is just more correlation from the horse's mouth again. For 24 years, the Dutch had held the Bulge of Brazil. Who are these Dutch? Remember that these Dutch were Jews, Protestant Jews. These were Sephardic people and Moors. Had held the Bulge of Brazil that extends into Atlantic Ocean, the province of Pernambuco, where Recife at its capital. Jews from Holland arrived in ever-growing numbers to join new Christians from Portuguese Brazil who had converted to their ancestral faith. Eventually, 2 congregations were formed, Sur Israel in the island city of Recife, and Magen Abraham on the mainland of Mauritia. By 1641, they had imported from Amsterdam Rabbi Isaac Abod da Fonseca, and the Haham scholar Moses Rafael de Aguilar, and public Jewish worship was held for the first time in the New World. Synagogues were built as their community grew and flourished. In 1645, however, the Portuguese began a guerrilla campaign that ultimately spelled the end of the Dutch dominion. All right. So now remember what we're reading. We're reading this journal from, the Jews themselves. So they're leaving out all who these people are. They're just tagging them as Portuguese and Jews. Now remember, these Dutch are Sephardic. These are Jews and Muslims, right? Trying to practice their religion out there peacefully. And the Portuguese right now are represented by the Catholic Empire. So these are Catholic people against Jews and Muslims, right? Remember, they're being persecuted. In this reference, we see them as Portuguese and Dutch. Again, most of these are people of color on both sides. 4 years later, the colony was besieged. 4 or 5 years, the Dutch held out despite starvation and lack of ships and supplies from the homeland. By 1654, when the Dutch surrendered to the Portuguese, the Jewish population, which had peaked at about 1,450 in 1645, had diminished to about 600. The Portuguese commander, Barreto, agreed to give Dutch citizens the right to emigrate within 3 months. Despite a paucity of available ships, every professing Jew left. The majority seemed to have gone to Amsterdam, when some of them returned to the New World. Others had already been trading in Guianas and the Caribbean and found their way to the new homes in these areas. All right, so remember, that was a little of their diaspora in 1654 when the Portuguese of the Catholic Empire regained control of Brazil, after the Dutch, so-called Dutch or Sephardic Jews from Amsterdam were already there for years. Farther north in Cayenne in 1662, a colony of Dutch Jews, these are Sephardic people, was organized by Abraham Cohen, a financier, and David Cohen, Nazi. As manager, Nazi was typical of the Portuguese New Christians seeking to flee the Inquisition. So who was fleeing the Inquisition? Moors, right? The Iberians, Sephardic Jews. Born in Portugal about 1612 with the name Cristóvão da Tavora, he escaped to Holland and adopted the name Joseph Nunes de Fonseca. So you see how they were changing their name almost completely? All right? Assimilating. To conceal his trail, or perhaps to protect relatives still in Portugal, he became David Cohen Nazi. Nazi was the founder of a prolific and important family in the Dutch colony. His sons Samuel and Joseph Cohen Nazi became military leaders in the Guianas and played a major role in the founding of Suriname's second congregation in 1605. In the hinterland, upriver from Paramaribo, at what came to be known as the Joden Savane, again a synagogue was built, the ruins of which, along with a cemetery, can still be seen in the jungle. By the end of the 17th century, the Jewish population of Barbados had grown to 250, sizable for an island that measured only 14 by 21 miles. Its Jewish community was organized by another refugee from Recife, who later returned to Amsterdam, known as Luis Diaz, alias Joseph Jesurun Mendes, alias, aka, Luis Diaz. A Dutch fleet captured Curaçao from the Spanish in 1634. Who was this Dutch fleet? Who was in the ships? Who was these pirates? Sephardic Jewish pirates, Dutch Protestant international merchants. On board as interpreter was a Portuguese New Christian, Samuel Cohen, and his boy, Samuel Cohen, all the same people who had lived in Brazil in the 1620s and was fluent in Dutch, Spanish, and Portuguese, as well as Indian dialects. Look at that. Cohen searched the island unsuccessfully for gold and returned to Amsterdam, leaving behind at least one other known New Christian, Juan or Julio de Araujo, who moved on to Mexico. In 1651, the Dutch West India Company, who was its founders and main shareholders, all right, Sephardic Jews were very involved in this. The Dutch West India Company, again, they're letting us know something here. Let's see what they're going to say. In 1651, the Dutch West India Company contracted with João de Ilan, a former New Christian, he's not a New Christian anymore, who had been active in the Brazil trade, to bring 50 Jewish settlers to the islands. I told you they were doing this, settling people, Sephardic Jews, full of shiploads of Sephardic Jews. But he succeeded in enticing only 12. Discouraged by the island's barren soil, they all left. 8 years later, Isaac da Costa in Amsterdam enlisted 70 fellow refugees from Brazil to establish Curaçao's first permanent Jewish settlement. Some of their descendants are still there as members of the synagogue. Right. So this is the journal, The Exodus from Brazil and Arrival in New Amsterdam of the Jewish Pilgrim Fathers, 1654. All right, again, that's what the year the Portuguese took the Portuguese crown took over Brazil again. So they had to bounce a lot of those Sephardic Jews because the Catholics were in town again. So there's a whole writing on this. This is the publication of the American Jewish Historical Society, Volume 44, Number 2, December 1954, from the Johns Hopkins University Press. All right, so hope you're following so far along. So we got this other book right here. It's called Amsterdam's Sephardic Merchants. Merchants, the Huguenots and merchants in the Atlantic sugar trade in the 17th century. All right, Ida Schroeder. Now, I'm not going to read this whole book. It would take a lot of hours and days, and I just wanted to show you the contents of this book, what it talks about, so you can see the topics: the Atlantic sugar trade, Amsterdam's Sephardic merchants in the 17th century. All right. There's the development of the Sephardic Jewish sugar trade network. All right, the sugar trade, Sephardic Jewish people of color. Right, the West India Company in Dutch Brazil. The West India Company. Right, development of the Sephardic sugar trade network. Right here, the British Caribbean world, Barbados, the myth of the Dutch and the Seraphim movement. Right, so the Dutch and the slave trade. All right, what is the Sephardic? And what Dutch are they talking about, and their involvement in what slave trade, and who was doing it to who? All right, these all people of color, these white people, what's going on here? We're getting a better understanding, right? Amsterdam's Dutch and Sephardic merchants in the Atlantic supply trade and sugar trade in the 17th century. Evidence from freight records: Portuguese Jewish merchants in Amsterdam in the first half of the 17th century. Dutch merchants in trade with Barbados in the mid-17th century. Sephardic Jewish merchants in trade with Barbados in the second half of the 17th century. All right. The mission of Ben Ased Ben Israel and Cromwell's Western design. All right. The emergence of Sephardic merchant communities of Barbados, the London Sephardic and New Christian Community, the British Trade and Navigation Act, the Sephardic communities of Amsterdam, Brazil, and Barbados. All right. They were everywhere. Sephardic merchants and the second Barbados, Jamaica, the second Barbados. That was Jamaica. That's what they were calling it. Jamaica under Spanish rule and British occupation. Clandestine and legal trade of Port Royal, the Sephardic moment. All right, Port Royal was a Sephardic place, the emergence of Jamaica's sugar colony. All right, the Atlantic sugar trade in the end of the 17th century, the Sephardic merchant network, and Amsterdam's refining industry. All right, and then the appendix. So that's a lot of the contents. Just want to go to the way back in the all the way to 256 is kind of towards the end, and it says here, conclusion. By the middle of the 18th century, several Sephardic Jewish agents and stockbrokers were working in London for correspondents in Amsterdam. Among them, and one of the more prominent, was Samson Gideon, the son of Roland Gideon, who had been a sugar planter and merchant in Barbados. A merchant. In order to understand the intricacies of the Sephardic Jewish business and trade network and assess the importance of their role in the Atlantic sugar trade and refining industry in Amsterdam, I gave a brief biography of the Gideon Abundiente family and their engagement in the sugar trade in the 17th and early 18th centuries in the preface. In closing, I will reiterate the highlights of the family history, starting with Roland Gideon after he left Barbados and moved to London. All right, so real quick, we go to footnote number 76, a sugar planter in Barbados. All right, footnote says Charles Wilson's Anglo-Dutch Commerce and Finance lists over 30 Amsterdam Jewish brokers and agents working in London for Amsterdam correspondents between 1720 and 1780. Most of them were what? Sephardic Jews, the people of color, and many of the family names were familiar from the Winitzer, the Shilstone, and notarial freight records used in this study. Wilson suggests that in the re-export Anglo-Dutch trade, London Jews, or Marranos, dealt with Amsterdam Jews, and London Christians and Amsterdam Christians. All right, Christians, Protestants. It's talking about dealing with Protestants. All right, Huguenots. Samson Gideon became a successful financier and broker in the course of the 18th century. Samson is named along with Abraham Mokkata and several other prominent Sephardic financiers as a precious metal broker for the British East India Company. All right, so a lot of these Sephardic Jews, all right, we're gonna see if you continue to study, they held a lot of stock, they had a lot of shares, they had a lot of involvement in the foundation of the East India Company and the Dutch West Indian Company. All right, these people that were supposed to be enslaving people in Africa, they were actually bringing a lot of these Sephardic Jews, a lot of their people over. They were transporting, they were doing this kind of trade, and nothing to do with Africa mostly. All right, it had nothing to do. It was mostly about this over here in these regions of the world, from Europe to America. The biographies of Roland Gideon and Samson Gideon form the red thread of the experience of many Sephardic merchants in the Atlantic world in the late 17th century. Not all merchants ended up rich, but many sojourned from port to port and island to island and justifiably deserved the designation of port Jew, which implies mobility, flexibility, and business acumen as referred to in Chapter 1 among the Sephardic Jewish merchants in the Atlantic trade, an intricate pattern of adjustment, development in response to the constantly changing political economic situations. No doubt, forced baptism, expulsion, and the threat of the Inquisition led to escape and migration, which became a pattern of response among new Christians and Sephardic Jews. New Christians, but offered opportunities. Following the defeat of the Dutch in Brazil, 1654, many Sephardic merchants returned to Amsterdam, but also began to expand their horizons westward. Their implementation of the British trade and navigation laws and commission trade offered opportunities to obtain denization papers in order to reside and trade with London and the British West Indian colonies, as well as with the Dutch colonies in the Caribbean. And thus Sephardic merchants moved goods over long distances and often through multiple transit points. In fact, a cargo vessel might contain a variety of colonial products, including cacao, coffee, sugar, indigo, tobacco, and logwood, which were traded at various ports against wares brought from Europe or loaded along the way in exchange for colonial products for the return voyage. And this is a genealogical history. Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. You see these two symbols right here, and then you see the tree signifying a family tree, a branch of genealogy, and you can interpret it however you want. This is by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. Very good, informative book, very scholarly, a lot of sources to verify the information. In this work, we present a series of colonial documents, contemporary first-hand accounts, records, portraits, family genealogies, and ethnic DNA test results, which fundamentally challenge the national storyline depicting America's first settlers as white, British, and Christian. All right? They weren't white or British or Christians. All right, you guys ready? We postulate that many of the initial colonists were of Sephardic, Jewish, and Muslim Moorish ancestry. All right, they didn't ever taught this, to us in history. They made us think of the, like this George Washington looking kind of people, But this is the truth right here. All right, that's why I highlight it. Guys, keep that in your mind. All right, correlating with everything we're learning, right? Usually arriving as crypto Jews with their religious adherents disguised as crypto Muslims. All right, disguised as crypto Muslims, Moors. These immigrants served in prominent economic and political, financial, and social positions in all of the original colonies, even and particularly New York, founded by the Dutch as New Amsterdam, was heavily peopled by Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moors. New York, all right, understand this, please. And this is not to bash anybody, make anybody feel like they're not indigenous or anything, but you understand a lot of these people, and they had a lot of offspring and descendants that they left behind in these places, like in New York, all right? Who are these people mixing with the Shinnecock, with ODB's family? Who's ODB? Can he have also Sephardic Jew and Muslim more in him other than Shinnecock? Most likely, yes. This is what I'm trying to explain, all right? But I don't know. He might be more one side or more on the other side. Who knows? I'm just saying it's part of the history. And again, these are people of color, so-called black people, right? Founded by Dutch, as New Amsterdam was, all right? And these Dutch were Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moors. The presence of persons from these ethnic affiliations on the governing boards of the Dutch West and East India companies. Again, another source letting us know who was running things in the Dutch West and East India companies. Again, Sephardic Jews had their hands all over this. Muslim Moors had their hands all over these companies that were supposed to be enslaving Africans, right? This is what they told us growing up, right? These are people of color mostly running this, financing this, providing the networks, the ships, making it all happen, the networks with their poor Jews, their families, their international, their merchant international organization they had already built for hundreds of years. That was their whole background, even from ancient times. They included Jonathan Cohen or Cohen and Cornelius Spielman, another classic Jewish name. Other New Amsterdam and later New York residents were Jacob Abrahamson and Dennis Isaacson. We present contemporaneous testimony suggesting that even the leading Knickerbocker families of the New York colony, the Van Cortlands, Phillipses, Van Rensselaers, Delanoes, and Delanceys were Sephardic ancestry. All these prominent families of New York were what? Sephardic ancestry, Iberian people. A case will be made here for crypto-Jewish and crypto-Muslim presence in British North America. We propose that many of the initial colonists in Virginia, all right, many of the initial colonists in Virginia, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Maryland were of Jewish and Moorish descent, all right? If not of Jewish and Moorish self-identification or public labeling as such, Appendix A presents an abundance of source material concerning Jewish surnames. The question of any given individual's religious adherence can be bracketed for the time being. At any rate, each claim about religion has to be answered on a case-by-case basis, all right? They made their studies. They know what they're talking about. You got to get specific. No more generalization. And very little research has been completed on the varieties of the Jewish religious experience in colonial America. Appendix B, Rituals and Practices of the Secret Jews, and Appendix C, Muslim Rituals and Beliefs, contain a mixture of religious traditions and social customs. What is central to our inquiry is ancestry. We suggest Dutch, New Amsterdam, later British New York and New Jersey harbored and sometimes welcomed people of Jewish ancestral origins and affinities. As Protestantism swept across Western Europe, many of these Jewish conversos and moriscos became often only outwardly Protestant. What? All right, again, let me highlight that. Many of the Jewish conversos and moriscos became often only outwardly Protestant. Huguenots, New Christians, all right, swelling the ranks of the dissenters. Some even provided leaders for the Huguenots, Hussites, Anabaptists, Calvinists, German Reformed, Walloons, Mennonites, Dunkards, Quakers, Puritans, and Presbyterians. All these people, possible connection, strong connection to Jewish conversos and Moriscos, Moors. When the British, Dutch, and French began establishing colonies on the Atlantic seaboard, they sent as colonists not subjects of high political and social rank from their respective countries, but for the most part recently arrived patently anti-Catholic, newly minted Protestants. Many were debtors, prisoners or servants, indentured, right? Cast outs of society who were struggling to get onto their own feet in a new country. It says here a good overview of the role of Sephardic Jews in the history of modern-day mercantilism can be gleaned from Sephardic Genealogy 2002 by Jeffrey Malka. This study observes that Dutch Sephardim in the Netherlands were small merchants or shopkeepers. They dealt in tobacco and fish, worked as tailors or goldsmiths, physicians and money changers, and ran grocery stores. But some such as the Pereira, Barrios, and Pinto families rose to great wealths. Sephardic merchants dominated the lucrative trade in sugar, tobacco, silk, and precious stones, right? Sugar and tobacco, that's big. Wealthy Sephardim were very important both in the founding and running of the Dutch East India and West India companies, all right? The Sephardis, these are people of color who what? Were very important in the founding and running of the Dutch East India and West India companies. Weren't these companies supposedly enslaving Africans and bringing them to America? There's a whole different story now here, right? Whole different perspective. What were they really using their ships for? a role we shall later show had great significance for the early history of the Dutch colony of New York. Malka further notes that the Sephardim usually traded with their relatives, who lived as secret Jews in Spain, Portugal, and their possessions example the Canary Islands, Brazil, Florida, Cuba, and Mexico. They used aliases in order to protect their kinsmen from the Inquisition. All right? So they're talking about that global Protestant network, that port Jews, right? Or the Sephardic global network they had. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed that little recap when it comes to the Dutch, Sephardic Jews, Moors, Huguenots, and all Protestants. So we got a little background now. We're gonna get into this book again. We're gonna go to chapter 5. This book again is a genealogical history, Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. Again, we're in chapter 5. We're gonna continue. Check out the previous videos. We've gone over the introduction, the preface, and the previous chapters in detail. We're going to get into chapter 5 right now. It says here, New York colony, Dutch, British, and Jewish. New York has the distinction of being the only one of the 13 original colonies started as a non-English settlement. New Netherland additionally served as a magnet for non-English immigrants such as Germans and Scandinavians, to say nothing of Europeans already transplanted elsewhere in the New World, like South American Jews. All right, we just went over all that. South American Jews, who were they really? It was established by the Dutch with outposts at Fort Orange, Albany, in 1624, and New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island the following year. To understand its history, we must first become familiar with the Dutch East India and West India companies, instrumental in its creation. I remember we just went over the info, briefly, but you guys can check out the previous videos, the previous parts. And again, the Dutch East India and West India companies were mainly created and funded, financed by Sephardic and Moorish people of the Iberian Peninsula, who had become so-called Dutch, so-called French, English, but these were really crypto Jews, crypto Muslims. And those two companies, again, it says, were very instrumental in the creation of the New York colonies. The former was founded by 9 merchants who met at a wine tavern in Amsterdam, where in Holland, right? In Holland. Who was these merchants? Sephardic Jews, people of color. They were meeting up where? In Amsterdam. In 1594, at exactly the same time as the formal establishment of the Marrano community there. They included Hendrik Hude, Rainier Pond, Peter Hasselaar, Aaron ten Grotinhuis, Hendrik Buich, Severt Shem, Sema, Hebrew for descendant, also form of the first name Shem, John Poppin, Sephardic diminutive of Jacobo, John Karel, and Dirk van Os. All right. Now, before we continue, I just want to remind everybody what they were saying about these so-called Jews in England and in Amsterdam, right? What were they being described like? This is from part 4 of my video series, Nations of the World. And we went over this again. We're just going over again. We already know this is from the book, A Natural History of Man, the 3rd edition, volume 1. And it's telling us that the Jews of Portugal are very dark, right? Very dark, just like the newspaper was saying earlier to us, right? These Portuguese that were landing in New York, Detroit, Boston, right in the hoods. They ended up in the hoods of Boston. These were very dark. It's funny because the Cape Verdeans live in Boston and they also speak Portuguese. And again, this is a future video I'm going to work on for all the Cape Verdeans out there. You guys are American Indians and a lot of the Sephardic and Moorish people that came out of Spain and Portugal. When I get to this book, it says here, Shakespeare and the Jews, 20th anniversary edition, with the new preface of the author by James Shapiro. All right, so again, we were just talking about the these Jews in Holland, right? Now look what it says here. It says the accumulated experience of over 100 years of travel, trade, and conquest had convinced Europeans that some of the accepted stereotypes of Jewish racial otherness, including the belief that Jews were black, needed to be qualified. When William Brereton, all right, listen to this, William Brereton jotted down his impressions of the Jews in the synagogue in Amsterdam in 1635, in the 1600s, right? Jews in Amsterdam, we're talking about Sephardic Jews, right? He noted that the Jewish men are most black, so-called black, right? They're most what? Dark skin, dark complexion, they're most black, all right? William Brereton, remember we talked about him and what he had to do here in America and in the colonies of Massachusetts, right? So we're back in the book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America. Just wanted to, because they're talking about these Jews meeting up in Amsterdam, right? So we had a primary source letting us know that the people in the synagogue in Amsterdam, these Jews were very so-called black, right? They were dark-skinned. They were describing them as dark-skinned. We know the Portuguese and Spanish Jews were very dark or swarthy as well. We're going to continue in this book. Now, where we're talking about these founders, right? They were meeting up in Amsterdam. As it says here, the former was founded by 9 merchants who met at a wine tavern in Amsterdam in 1594 at exactly the same time as the formal establishment of the Marrano community there, right? Marranos. Now, going down to the second paragraph, it says, of the founders of the Dutch East India Company, most can be described as dark and Mediterranean in appearance. Okay? The founders of the Dutch East India Company, dark and Mediterranean in appearance, right? Iberian, Moorish in appearance, Dutch East India Company. They told us these were white people that were enslaving Africans and bringing, or Southeast Asians, right? But these were people of color that were doing this. Not one is a blonde, ruddy-cheeked Dutchman we might picture, okay? None of them are what we're thinking as so-called white people or the pale-skinned Europeans. Blonde hair, blue eyes, ruddy cheek, like the red cheeks. None of them. I'm telling you right now. Several were men who had fled from the southern Netherlands when Antwerp fell to Spanish control in 1585, and it is reported that 2 of the 9, John Karel and Dirk van Os, were Flemish. Their intention was to poach the spice and tea trade in the East Indies, established earlier by the Portuguese. From 1594 until as late as 1793, the Dutch East India Company traded with India, China, Japan, Persia, Southern Africa, Java, Ceylon, transporting over 1 million passengers, soldiers, craftsmen, and sailors eastward and constructing a remarkable Occidental presence in the Orient. All right, and if you saw my Asian video recently, now you know these people were, same people are the ones they're talking about right now, are the ones that were grabbing all those Southeast Asians and bringing them over to Mexico, to the Caribbean, to South America, all right, the so-called Chinos. All right, these indigenous people, these melanated indigenous people of Southeast Asia and Hindustan. All right, these were the merchants. These were the so-called traders or slavers. All right, no sugarcoating. Lead, vermilion, a dye stuff which appears as Jewish surname, and cochineal were exported to Asia. Cloves, cinnamon, pepper, coffee, nutmeg, and mace were imported to Europe, as were silk, cotton, opium, coral, and tin. Alone among the countries of Europe, the Dutch Republic around this time was moving toward declaring Jews citizens of the state, because it was the same people. As a first step in this direction, the Dutch Parliament asked eminent legal scholar Hugo Grotius to draw up ordinances governing their treatment. Grotius presented his report concerning the admission of Jews to the estates of Holland in 16 1619. What also happened in 1619, right? In Virginia. That's when the so-called first indentured servants arrived? With the renewed outbreak of war with Spain in 1621, many Moranos. All right, so listen to what's going on over there. These are the same time pilgrims, these first colonists are coming, these first so-called slaves. You understand, these people, a lot of those colonists, a lot of those indentured servants, a lot of those were people fleeing the Spanish Inquisition, the Catholics, and all the wars over there they were having with the Protestants, with the Moors, with the Jews. They were coming in the same times, 1619, 1620s. Come on, that's right when they were coming. And again, many Moranos in the United Provinces left Amsterdam and settled in Hamburg for the safety of their import business. Got to keep the business. The year 1639 saw most of them return, and unified Portuguese Jewish community was finally founded in Amsterdam. All right, a Portuguese Jewish. What did we just read about the Portuguese? What did we read earlier in the newspaper about the Portuguese Jew? Very dark complexion, so-called Negroes. Straight up, so-called black. 1639, they established a community, the so-called black Jews in Amsterdam. All right, we're going to dodge the hijack with the whitewashed images. The Dutch capital now became a magnet for Judaizers fleeing the Spanish Inquisition. Who was fleeing the Spanish Inquisition? The Moors and the Sephardic Jews of Spain and Portugal. They didn't just go to North Africa. Again, we just read it earlier. A lot of them were heading to Amsterdam, where they created their new Jerusalem. And this was a Protestant country, right? It's all the same people. A lot of Huguenots there too. The exodus included physicians, merchants, and financiers like the Da Costa. Again, here comes the Da Costa family popping up again. We know they're Swarty. We know they're listed as mulatto in North America. We know they were doing business. They had sugar plantations and all that. Cardozo and Mendoza families as well. The Cardozos and the Mendozas. Dutch Jews finally achieved emancipation in 1657, the same year as English Jews. The milestone owed its success to the same campaign centered on the petitions of Amsterdam's Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel. And he had a whole different name. I'm going to show you his name. All right, so this is what I'm talking about. This is something we read already in this book way back, and I'm just going back. And it says here, Malka further notes that the Sephardim usually traded with their relatives who lived as secret Jews in Spain, Portugal, and their possessions sampled the Canary Islands, Brazil, Florida, Cuba, and Mexico. And it says here, they used aliases in order to protect their kinsmen from the Inquisition. All right, we read this earlier. They used aliases. I didn't read the names, but it says Manasseh ben Israel, right? We're just talking about him. His real name was Manuel Diaz Soeira, and he was most likely born in the Madeira Islands or archipelago. A lot of Sephardic and Moorish people fled over there after the Inquisition. Again, his real name is Manuel Diaz Soeira. That's his real name, Manasseh ben Israel. Manuel Diaz Soeira. So again, we were reading back in chapter 5 that the milestone, this Dutch colonies, the milestone owed its success to the same campaign centered on the petitions of Amsterdam's Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel, or Manuel Soeira, right? AKA Manuel Soeira. New York differed from the other colonies. In another respect, its purpose was neither high-minded nor expedient. It was not to provide a refuge for religious dissidents, nor to act as an outlet for restless Northern European drang. Because of the Sephardic merchants who founded it, the New York colony was imbued from the start with a commercial spirit and innovative intellectual currents of freedom and secularism. We have seen already the importance of Averroism for Spanish and Dutch Jews. The Dutch Republic was not only the world's greatest maritime power. Who was the Marines, right? I learned this from the Moors. Who was on the ships? Who was the greatest maritime power? Moors, right? Sephardic Jews and Moors, Iberians, especially during this time. And so the Dutch took over this power. Why? Again, because they were literally Sephardic Jews and Moors, really. They had fled up there. They made all the connections with their people, wherever they had them, in all the ports of wherever they had gone in the world. And they started their East India, West India companies. Again, the Dutch Republic was not only the world's greatest maritime power, but its most enlightened government, championing freedom to such an extent that it welcomed the ideas of René Descartes, John Locke, and Benedict de Spinoza. All right, remember we got Benedict de Spinoza earlier. We got a primary source saying he is swarthy, describing him with swarthy complexion, Benedict de Spinoza. All immigrated there to escape attack in their own countries, right? They were being persecuted. The English journalist and novelist Daniel Defoe aptly observed of the Dutch economic spirit. The Dutch must be understood as they really are, the middle persons in trade, the factors and brokers of Europe. They buy to sell again, take in to send out, and the greatest part of their vast commerce consists in being supplied from all parts of the world, that they may supply all the world again. They got connections everywhere. They're getting supplies from everywhere. They got the hookup. They're the middlemen, controlling the money and the trade. They were doing this since ancient times. It all makes sense, right? These Sephardic, Jewish, and Moorish people. The cartographers for the East India Company were commercially minded Sephardic Jews of the same mold. All right, the map makers, the cartographers, we know this, right? We know. They included Petrus Plancius, Vlad Foti from Flanders, and the Blau, probably from the name for indigo dye, an Arab and Jewish specialty item, and Van Keulen from Cologne families. In 1641, the company succeeded in taking the port of Malacca from the Portuguese, gaining an important trade route between Europe and East Asia. No doubt this prize was considered a type of reprise, avenging the expulsion of the members' ancestors from Iberia 150 years earlier. All right, so they were literally attacking the Catholics, not just Portuguese, but the Catholics, because these were Sephardic and Moorish people who were getting revenge. Between 1619 and 1629, the company's director was John Peterson Cohen, or Cohan. Cohen handpicked and then groomed much of the leadership that followed him, and many of his protégés appear to have been fellow Jews. Under his direction, the company built a trade network stretching from the Cape of Good Hope and Persia in the west via India, Ceylon, and Malacca, and the Indonesian archipelago to China and Japan in the far east. All right? It was all them. The network encompassed some 30 settlements and made the company the most powerful merchant in Asia. All right? The most powerful, the Sephardic and Moorish people over there with the Chinos, right? The indigenous people of Southeast Asia and all that, too, as well as the largest trading company in the world at the end of the 17th century. By 1750, 20,000 civil servants and soldiers resided in the company's Asia settlements. The company's list of imports grew to include indigo, cashmere, elephants, horses, diamonds, lacquer work, porcelain, which significantly impacted European material culture and aesthetics. Very important materials these Moorish and Sephardic Jews were bringing into the rest of the world and trading. You see how much wealth they had and power and control, right? How much wealth and control and power. Who's the real colonist? One of the best remembered directors of the Dutch East India Company was Cornelius Speelman, 1628 to 1684, actor, Buffon. Upon his death, King William III created the Speelman Baronetcy in Great Britain, and his mother was given the rank of widow of a baronet of England, even though he had never strictly speaking, acceded to the title. He wasn't even English. A descendant is Jewish chess champion Jonathan Spielman, born in 1956. That's one of his descendants. So now it says here the Dutch West India Company. All right. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Western Europe was experiencing dramatic increases in prosperity, strengthening the demand for luxury goods. The Muscovy Company of England, Muscovy, Muskogi, Moscow. The Muscovy Company of England was created in 1570 to trade with Russia for animal pelts used in fashionable hats of the day as well as for warm clothing. French incursions into the fur-rich St. Lawrence region of North America were much envied by the Dutch, all right? The fur traders here in America. Remember, a lot of those were Acadian, a lot of those were Huguenots, aka Moors, Sephardic Jews. The North American fur trade grew to such a scale and magnitude that it chartered half a continent and shaped the destinies of every Indian tribe in what is now Canada. All right. I recommend checking out my video. I believe it's part 15 of my series from Indigenous American to African American, part 15, with the French were over here. What they were really doing in this fur trade, not just fur, but they were also enslaving indigenous people. All right, that was part of the trade too. But you see, it was very big and it affected almost every tribe in Canada. It went far toward building the reputation for riches and luxurious living of the French monarch Louis XIV. He got rich off this, styled the Sun King for the golden splendor of his court. Significantly, one of the explicit aims of the West India Company was to remove the resources which Philip IV, King of Spain and Portugal, drew from his American possessions. All right, these are Philip, descendant of Charles V, so-called black man. According to Jewish Caribbean chronicler Mordecai Arbel, it was, in a way, an instrument of war against Spain, and this purpose dictated many of the company's decisions when sending colonists to the New World. All right, so now remember, I know it's hard to keep up with what they're really talking about when they talk about Dutch fighting Spain. Now remember, these Dutch are Moorish Sephardic Jews, and at the time, when they're saying they're fighting Spain, they mean the Catholics, the Holy Roman Empire, right? Because they are also Spanish or Portuguese, a lot of them. They came from Spain. They're not fighting their own country. They're fighting their Holy Roman Empire. These Jews and Moors, that's what they're doing. That's why these pirates were attacking Spanish, so-called Spanish. These are the Catholic ships, all right? These Pirates of the Caribbean. Check out my Pirates of the Caribbean video, all right? That's part 9 of Nations of the World. Soon, an Antwerp-born merchant whose family had fled to Amsterdam in 1585 after the Spanish invasion entered the fur trade arena in North America by joining with 2 French partners. His name was Arnout Vogels, Hebrew Zipporah Bird. Participants in this effort to make inroads on one of the most lucrative markets of the day included persons named Simeon or Simon, Mao, Moses Maurice, Francois or Francois, and Leonard Pilgrim or Pilgrim Wayfarer, Cornelius Reiser, Traveler, Adrian Black, Thais Mosel from Moselle, and Hans Hungar, Hungarian, names suggesting that this was largely an international and Jewish undertaking, right? A second set of merchants from Hoorn in the Netherlands included Cornelius Jacobs May, Simon Nooms Jiddisch Nochem, and Jonas Wilson. Yet a third group included Jacob and Hendrik Ilkens, or Elkanah, and Adrian Johns Engel, example, Angel. By 1626, the West India Company had been formed with Isaac de Racieres serving as its chief commercial agent in New Netherland. Its corporate charter divided it into 5 chambers or branches: Amsterdam, Zeeland, the Maya cities, the Northern Quartier, and Friesland, Groningen. Its board of directors consisted of 19 men, termed simply the 19 in company documents. You see that? You see that? Like a secret society being all secretive. They just called themselves the 19. The 19 in Roman numerals in the company documents. From the beginning, it functioned as a mercantile military arm of the Netherlands, attacking, plundering, and otherwise harassing the hated enemy, Spain and her colonies, or the Holy Roman Empire's colonies. The Dutch under John de Moor, all right, John de Moor, the Dutch under John de Moor, literally John de Moor, all right, literally John de Moor, all right, Moor, established colonies in Guyana, the Amazon, and Esquibo during the early 1600s and viewed for the rich trade in Brazilian sugar, all right? Future video, we've gone over this information before, but it was the Sephardic Moorish people that first started the sugar plantations in their exiled countries, like in the Madeiras, in North Africa, in the Canary Islands, Cape Verde, and then they brought that knowledge with them to Brazil and the Caribbean and North America, all right? Who? Moors, right? Remember when we're talking about the white man came and brought this? No, it wasn't no white man who established the sugar plantations. It wasn't. It was Jean de Moor, literally John de Moor, literally John de Moor in Brazil, all right? They contemplated conquering Brazil because, in their view, the Portuguese were neither able nor willing to offer effective resistance, especially as many of them were Jews, sworn enemies of the Spanish Inquisition. All right, they were the same people. Of course, come. Isaac de Racieres was born in Middelburg in the Netherlands in 1595, all right, Holland. Little is known of his early life until 1626, when he came to New Netherland as a chief trading agent for the Dutch West India Company and secretary for the province. William Bradford, in the History of Plymouth Plantation, describes him as the upper commis of chief merchant. All right, so he was dealing with this Moorish person, right? William Bradford, one of the pilgrims, describes him as their upper commis or chief merchant, the second to the governor, a man of fair and gentle behavior, but who soon after fell into disgrace among them by reason of their factions. This rupture is believed to have occurred between November 1627 and September 1630, when de Racieres' successor began to officiate as secretary. Racieres was married in Amsterdam in 1633 to the niece of one of the directors of the West India Company. Certain members of the company tried to make him governor of New Netherland, replacing Wouter van Twiller, but this attempt failed. He afterwards moved to Brazil, home to many Jews and crypto-Jews, where one of his sons was born in 1637 and a second in 1641. Upon his second son's marriage in Amsterdam in 1669, the record simply reads, parents departed to Barbados, again, a center of Marrano settlement. It is a family legend that Racieres became governor of Tobago. 1624, the West Indies Company made the decision to plant colonies in North America. Not surprisingly, given what we have already seen of the English strategy, the company used Sephardim as antagonists in the first onslaught. All right, they used who? Sephardic, people of color. These are, remember, people described as very dark complexion in Portugal and Spain. All right, the Sephardim. as antagonists in the first onslaught. The earliest settlers were Walloons. All right, remember, Walloons, that includes a lot of the Moors, Protestant refugees from the southern Netherlands, who displayed willingness to risk wives and children towards immigration. Why would they do that? Because it was literally life or death at times. The Catholics, the Holy Roman Empire was doing the Inquisition, right? The Spanish Inquisition. We know what they were doing to a lot of these Sephardic Jews and Moors. That's why they had to flee. They would risk sending their wives and children towards emigration. As we have witnessed happening repeatedly from Roanoke to Jamestown, from Plymouth Rock and Boston to the shores of South Carolina and Maryland, former Sephardim and Moors, now surfacing in various hues of Protestantism, all right, now under Protestantism, I pay attention, we already got the drop already, we know this, right? They're just using the Protestantism tag or label just to get, away with pretending to be somewhat Christians. Were placed aboard ships and transported from Western Europe to North America, all right? They were put on ships, right? Deuteronomy 28, ships, right? It wasn't Africans, really. You saw my Asian video, right? They were literally doing this to Europeans and Asians more than Africans. They told us a complete lie. All right, now in this case, we're reading about the Sephardic Jews and Moors. They were literally putting them on ships, sending them to populate the colonies. In this case, we're talking about New Netherland or New York, New Holland, all these places. As we have witnessed happening repeatedly from Roanoke to Jamestown, same thing, right? They did with the first colonies in Virginia. We got those videos and those chapters already. Make sure to check out the videos. These were the real first colonists. A lot of them didn't know how to farm because they were just Sephardic Jews who were bankers. They had other professions, blacksmiths. They never farmed in their life. So a lot of them had to learn from the Indians, these pilgrims, right? As it's about to say here, from Plymouth Rock and Boston to the shores of South Carolina, Maryland, former Sephardim and Moors, now surfacing in various hues of Protestantism, right, were placed aboard ships and transported from Western Europe to North America. In addition to the Walloons came French Huguenots. Who's the Huguenots? Again, ex-Moors. Moors who had fled to southern France became known as Huguenots. They were Calvinists. John Calvin or Cohen was a Sephardic Jew. All the same people. Recruited by one Jesse de Forest, Jesse Silva. All these incoming ostensibly Dutch settlers received free passage and an allotment of land to cultivate for their own usage. Conscripts were permitted freedom of conscience in religious matters, so long as the public aspect of religious worship adhered to the Reformed Protestant practice of the Netherlands. As long as in public they pretended to be Protestants, they can do whatever they want. They can do whatever they want in private, practice whatever religion, whatever beliefs they had. All right? This, of course, left the way clear for continuation of Judaic and Islamic practices in the privacy of their homes. Islam was here from the beginning in America. Since the beginning of its foundation, at least with the colonies, right? Not with original people. Also in 1624, the West Indies Company revised its charter to launch the Partrum system. Under such auspices, an entrepreneur, the patron, collected 20 families as settlers. All right, listen to this is how they settled people. There's a different way other than indentured servants by force. All right, they collected 20 families as settlers, provided them with all needed equipment and passage to North America, and received 1,000 acres of land for 20 families. 1,000 acres of land. John de Moore, all right, John de Moore, literally, remember, John de Moore played an important part in gathering colonists for these ventures in South America, the Caribbean, and North America. John the Moor, right? John the Moor. What's going on? This history they didn't tell us. They didn't teach none of us this in school. They wanted us to think these were all pale-skinned Christians or Catholics, Englishmen, right? They didn't teach us none of this. But I want you guys to wake up, stop stereotyping, and especially when you're trying to say, "Oh, Kurimeo, you're a Spaniard, you're this." What Spaniard? It's the same people we're talking about right now. Same people, Sephardic and Moorish people. Yeah, those were my Spaniard and Portuguese ancestors. That was my part, that part of the tree. That's not my only genealogy. But if you want to talk about it, it's the same one you got in your genealogy. Same people. Same people. Same Sephardic and Moorish people. Jean de Moor, right? John de Moor. Gathering all these colonies for all these ventures to South America, the Caribbean, and North America. Other prominent patrons, or patrones, patroon, colonizers were David de Vries, Samuel Gooden, Johannes de Laet, Samuel Blommaert, Flowers or Flores, Kilian van Rensselaer, Albert Conrads, Cornelius Bicker, Gomer Springer, and Hendrik Hamel, Hebrew letter shaped like a camel. Hebrew letter shaped like a camel. Jewish mercantilist motives were also instrumental in the formation of New Sweden. Right? New Sweden, New Jersey, Delaware, all that. New Sweden. This colony was another offshoot of the Dutch West India Company, one spearheaded by its Baltic base in the West Swedish port of Gothenburg, where Marranos, right? Marranos and Moriscos, right? Marranos and Moriscos and other expatriates of Spain and Portugal dominated the merchant community. Who's over there running things before they came to America? In Sweden? In Holland? In Germany? All right, dodge the hijack with these whitewashed images, because they're literally telling us these people are dark-skinned. Sephardic Moors, literally, right? John de Moor, literally. Continues, says, 2 ships under the command of the disaffected former governor of New Netherland, Peter Minuit, reached the mouth of the Delaware River near present-day Wilmington in 1638. They established Fort Christina, named it in honor of the Swedish queen. 5 years later, the Amsterdam investors sold out. Finland was the eastern third of the Swedish nation of that time. A reorganization brought thousands of Finnish, farmers, but they were too few to hold the colony against attack from their Dutch neighbors to the north. The Swedish colony surrendered to Peter Stuyvesant, the governor of New Amsterdam. Most of the Finns, however, remained. The design of the pioneer log cabins became one of their enduring gifts to America. The Swedes also attempted to establish 3 colonies in the Caribbean, all inspired by similar commercial motives. The island of Tobago had a similar early history of links to Marranos, Tobago, in Amsterdam. It was founded by the obscure Baltic Duchy of Cortland, whose ruler, Duke Jacobs or Jacobus, was related by marriage to shareholders of the Dutch West India Company. Having ventured first to plant a colony in Gambia and Africa, where did they go? They went to Africa, they didn't go grab people to bring them to America. They went to establish a colony there. Cortland, with its Latvians, became in 1639 the tiniest European state to boost a colony in the New World. Tobago lasted until 1693 and earned fame as one of the first international settlements of freemen. All right? One of the first what? Settlements of what? Freemen. Freemen. Free from what? They're not talking about slavery of African slaves. Even settlers or drawing settlers from Latvia, Lithuania, Amsterdam, Zealand, and the semi-autonomous Jewish state in Livorno, France and its colonies, Germany, Brazil, Africa, and even the native populations of Caribs on the island itself. All these plans were laid down by investors in Amsterdam and carried out on Dutch shipping with Jewish interests at heart. Revealing non-Dutch settlers composed nearly half of the colonists at New Netherland. It became the most religiously and ethnically mixed colony in North America. Freedom was such a byword that the dissident Anne Hutchinson declared a heretic in Massachusetts, moved there from exile in Rhode Island. He met an unfortunate death at the hands of Indian insurrection in 1643. All right, so we continue in the book, Jews and Muslims in British colonial America, just in case you guys just tuned in. We're in chapter 5 of this book. We just continue to read the book. And when this part of chapter 5, it says here, marriage patterns among early Dutch colonists. Marie Taine, or Taine, Toyney, let us take a closer look at some of these non-Dutch Huguenot and Walloon settlers. Marie Taine married Jean Leroy in 1671. Her brother Isaac had immigrated to New Amsterdam some years before her own voyage in 1660. Isaac was made a burgher of New Amsterdam on June 24th, June 1666. He obtained a grant of land at Newcastle, Delaware, and married Sarah Reason, a name that is Persian for prince, as previously noted. Marie and her husband, Philippe Cassier, sailed directly from Manhattan from the Texel in the Netherlands on April 27, 1660, on board the Gilded Otter, and settled at Haarlem. All right, Haarlem. Again, these are people of color. Haarlem is still what? What is Haarlem still today? On 23rd July, 1664, 17 Haarlem residents had their names transferred to the register of the church at Fort Amsterdam, to which several of them had previously belonged. It says here, Jean Le Montagne Jr. and Maria Vermeil, his wife, Daniel Tournier and Jacqueline Parisis, his wife. All right, so it keeps going. See all the different names, Albinos, Maestre. Again, these are not Dutch people, non-Dutch. These are like Huguenots, Walloons. Again, Huguenots, Walloons. A lot of these are just Moors and Sephardic Jews. Former residents or landholders in the same community included Nicholas de Meyer and Lydia Van Dyck, his wife Jacques Couzeau, and Madeleine du Tullier, his wife, Philip Cassier and Marie Taine, his wife, William de la Montagne, Anne Verville, Aaron Johnson, Mosman, and Julian Hanel. After the death of her husband, Philippe Cassier, Marie sold the lot in Haarlem and moved within New Amsterdam. Her sons Jean and Jacques had a bakery there. In 1671, she married Jean Leroy. All right, so I'm glad we're doing over this, because I am planning to do a special video on just the history of Manhattan and its first settlers. All right, and also the Seneca settlement, right? So-called Seneca settlement that was there. All right, so this is a good background. Again, remember, a lot of these Europeans were not pale skinned. These are the real Europeans, and their real genealogical history there. It's Sephardic and Moorish, as it's about to tell us. It says, now, the preceding account of the Taine or Tony family reveals probable Sephardic or Moorish roots. Note that Isaac Taine married a woman named Sarah Reason. As discussed elsewhere, the surname Reason claims linkage to the royal family of Persia as a retainer or chamberlain. The surname of one of their co-passengers, Jacqueline Parisis, is also a Persian origin, meaning Farsi or Persian. Jean Le Montagne, or mountain, montaña, was likely originally John Montana in Spanish. Now, honestly, I have a theory about this. I don't know. This is my opinion here, guys. I'm just going to throw out an opinion. But Montague, the French way, right? It almost sounds like Montauk, like the Indian tribe, American Indian, the Montauk. All right, something to look into that I'm going to dig into, all right? but they're saying it goes back to the Sephardics Montana. Samus is Arabic for descendant. Jacomima, Jacobs bore Hebrew first and last names. Taniki is Hebrew for Tanakh, the first 5 books of the Bible. Aren't Mosmen carried discerning Moses? Finally, Marie Taine remarried to Jean Leroy of the King, another surname attached to Jews or Moors in the service of the royal family. Philippe Cassier, or Calais in France, is first mentioned in the Huguenot settlement of the fresh West Indies. Huguenots, right? Moors, settling where? In the French West Indies. Where would that be? Martinique, Haiti, and all the other places, right? Louisiana, Acadia. Philippe and Marie Taine, Cassier's first 2 children, Jean and Marie, were born in Martinique. In 1645, he and others left the island and returned to Europe. I remember my very last video I dropped last night, the one about where I'm talking about the Black Codes or the Code Noir. And remember, that was targeting the Jews and the Moors that were there. These Code Noirs, the Catholic or the Jesuits, were the ones establishing these Black Codes, and they were going after these Sephardic Jewish people, the same ones we're reading about right now in this different book, letting us know Huguenots, right, which were Moors, right? Huguenots. Cassier, Calais, this guy, Philip Cassier, was a Huguenot. He was a Moor. All right, he was a Moor. He was in Martinique. That's where the Black Codes were against his people. In 1645, he and others left the island and returned to Europe. He went first to Calais, then to Sluis in Flanders, where his daughter Hester was born. Many French and Walloon exiles from England and the Dutch seaboard fled to Mannheim in Germany, drawn there by assurances of freedom and protection under the government of the Protestant elector Karl Ludwig. All right, it was a Protestant country, so they were allowed to go there. It was the same people. Sometime after 1652, he moved to the Lower Palatinate. All right, the German Palatines. Again, a lot of these people that came in were people of color. A lot of them were Sephardic Moorish people that were living in the Palatine Rhineland area. All right, along with a number of professed Protestants. By 1652, David Demaris, Greek, and other Huguenot refugees arrived to join in forming a French church. In it were Philippe Cassier and his family, Simeon Cornier, Maynard Journey Diaz from Mardic, Flanders, Jules van Oblinus, also from Walloon, Flanders, and Pierre Parmentier from Waasland, equally Walloon country. Philip's daughter, Marie Cassier, married David Uziel or Uziel about this time, and in 1660 their son Peter was born. But Cassier was not content at Mannheim. His wife's brother Isaac Taine had gone to the New World earlier and become a burgher of New Amsterdam. And so the Cassier family, Uzielis included, right? So he went over there. The same ship carried Matthäus Blanken, or White, and others from Mannheim, including a band of soldiers, among whom were Jacob Leisler and Jos Coquet. Continuing, says Philippe Cassier, David Uzieli, and their family settled in Harlem. In Harlem on Manhattan Island. These are people of color. All right, these so-called Dutch Huguenots. Remember, the Huguenots are Moors. By the end of 1661, there were over 30 adult males settled in the same place. These were Michael Cypergus from Cyprus, John Sneeden, Jean Lamontagne Jr., Michael Jancy Maiden, Daniel Tournier, Jean Leroy, Pierre Creason, Jacques Creason, Philippe Cassier, David Usilli, Jacques Cousseau, Philip Presto, Francois Le Sueur, Simon de Rouen, Gerritsen, Maiden Kortsen, Art Petersen Weiss, Sigmundus Lucas, John Petersen Slot, Nicolas de Meyer, Jan Lawrence Duitz, German, Jacob Elders Brouwer, Niels Matheson, Manes Petersen Stijk, Jan Kogu or Cohen, Adolf Meyer, Adam Derrickson, and Hendrik Carsons. The common denominator was again Jewish roots. The list provides 3 additional Hebrew Arabic surnames: Usil, Lucas, and Meir. 2 others appear to be Turkish: Bais, Bey, all right, Bey, King, Lord Bey. Boys is Bey, and Carson, Carson. David Usili says here. The Usili surname is clearly Sephardic Hebrew, meaning God is my strength. David Usil's family came originally from near La Moselle in Lower Brittany. He married Marie Magdalena, the eldest daughter of Philippe Cassier from Calais. The Reformed Church at Nantes and Le Moselle was supported by Le Maistres and Usilis, and Henry G. Bayers, the Belgians' first settlers in New York and in the Middle States. We read, a little colony of Walloons, all right, who's the Walloons? Moors, flying before the troops of the Duke of Alva, had come to settle within the territory of the Palatinate at Frankenthal, near Mannheim, its capital, where we find many families that later moved to New Netherland. David de Marest, Frederick de Vaux, Abraham Hasbrook, Chrétien Duyou, Métis or Matthew Blanken, Tonette Terrin, Pierre Parmentier, Antoine Crispel, David Usili, Philip Cassier, Bourgeon Brucard, Simon Lefebvre, Justin Durier, and others. Also found in Flanders are Robert de Toeni from Tunis, all right, from Tunis, Hilbert de Toeni, Jumel de Toeni, Raoul de Toeni, Ural de Toeni, Berenger de Toeni, and Guillaume de Toeni. De Toeni is considered to be the original name of the Tain family. The Tain family, what does it mean? From Tunis. From Tunis, that's from North Africa, right? Tunis, Tunisia. Magdalene's brother, Peter Usil, married Cornelia Damon, Dutch Jewish surname. In 1685, the sister of Lisbeth Damon, who married Jan Cassier, son of Philippe and Marie Tain Cassier, another daughter, Marie Usil, married Leonard Tremy, also known as Jonard Leroy, in 1703. Adopting the pseudonym to disguise a Sephardic name, Jonard Leroy was common practice among Marranos and Conversos wishing to avoid the attention of the Inquisition. These were Moors, all right? These were their aliases, remember. Among Marranos and Conversos, who's the Conversos? They were forced to converse, the Moors, the Muslim Moors, and the Sephardic Jews into Catholicism, Christianity, wishing to avoid the attention of the Inquisition, the Holy Roman Empire, the Catholics. With this account, we are beginning to see another market of Sephardic Moorish ancestry. Again, another market of what? Sephardic Moorish ancestry. This is not me telling you, this is real history. Marriage to first and second cousins across multiple generations. Marriage to what? First and second cousins. And we'd be finding that in the genealogies sometimes. Those who have done the genealogy know what I'm talking about. There's a strong gravitation toward Amsterdam, and thence to the new world of Sephardic families already interrelated in Spain and living in exile in scattered places such as Calais, Rouen, Normandy, Brittany, Tunisia, Flanders, Greece, Turkey, and Germany. This was an international set of allied families united by their Jewish, or perhaps better said, crypto-Jewish faith. Sephardic Jews, very dark complexion, swarthy, so-called Negro people, so-called black, right? And we read earlier about their Protestant International and the Dutch International, Huguenot International, and that we know the poor Jews, we got to past videos, how they were running everything. All right, so this is big. These families had connections and they were big. And they made it happen when they got to the colonies too. They were the original colonists of America. Now it says here, again, we're reading the book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, a Genealogical History. We're in chapter 5 of this book. This part of the book says here, Founding of New Amsterdam, a broader analysis of the Dutch presence in New Amsterdam lays bare some of the motives for Jews and Moors to immigrate to New York colony. All right? From Harlem, historian James Van Der Zee, we learned that the Amsterdam fur traders who initiated explorations into the interior of North America had contracts with the French in Rouen, a Sephardic Moorish stronghold, all right? Encountered by us again and again, again and again. It all connects if you really understand the history of what was going on in Europe before the colonization of America with the Sephardic Moorish people. Among the Amsterdam fur traders were William Usseling's corruption of Usili and Kilian van Rensselaer. Both were very wealthy. Rensselaer was a juror. When the New Amsterdam was colonized initially in 1625, the only stone building was its counting house or bank. Other buildings were wood. All right? Its only building. What was the first building? A bank. Of course, the bank. Sephardic Jews running that. Other buildings were wood. Any church remained to be built for a long time. Even churches weren't built for a long time. The bank was first. These are sure signs that the colony was a mercantile venture with not even a lip service being paid to religion. This was a mercantile colony. It had nothing to do with freedom of religious persecution or anything like that, like Plymouth or Virginia and all those places. It is also reported that the Dutch ambassador to England at this time was an Albert Joachim, Dutch Jewish. He was replaced by Jacob Katz of an openly Jewish family. Katz, anagram of Hebrew Kohani, Sadek, righteous priest. Remembered today as a poet and humorist, Katz was born at Brouwershaven in Zeeland on the 10th of November, 1577. After losing his mother and being adopted with his 3 brothers by an uncle, he was sent to school at Zierikzee. He went on to study law at Leiden and Orleans. Returning to Holland, he settled at The Hague and began to practice as an advocate. In 1602, he married the wealthy Jewess Elizabeth von Valkenburg. In 1627, Katz visited England on a mission to Charles I, who made him a knight. Within New Amsterdam proper was a motley array of residents. There was the mulatto Anthony Johns and Sally from Morocco, son of a Dutch buccaneer. Who was the buccaneers and the pirates? We already know, same people, who had worked for the Sultan Moulay Sadan. All right, you hear what's going on. This is real history, real trade, real allegiances between these people. By 1633, we're still just in the 1600s. The West India Company found it hard to recruit any more Dutch settlers and made its colony available to everyone, promising free land to any who would cultivate it. So, free land if you knew how to cultivate it. Would you go? Would you take the deal? I would. Go to paradise, warm, nice place, nice fertile land, no more Catholics on my back, a little farther away. Yeah, I think I would. When it comes to life or death, you might take that deal too. A variety of interlopers arrived, including James Ferret, a Scot claiming to be the agent of Henry Alexander, Earl of Stirling, Lionel Gardiner, who acquired an island nearby, and a group of Swedes under the supervision of John Prince, Jewish surname. Colonial New York historian Michael G. Kamen reports that in 1657, 31 residents of Flushing, New York, sent a remonstrance home stating the law of love, peace, and liberty in the state extends to Jews, Turks, and Egyptians, as they are considered the sons of Adam, which is the glory of Holland. This was the same year Jews were officially recognized with decrees of tolerance in both Holland and England. All right, again, 1657, this is happening in New York. That's the kind of letters that are going out. All right, not talking about no English Christian or Catholics. All right, this is the stories this is the letters that are going out of New York. The Dutch were never able to make a success of their New Amsterdam colony. In 1664, when it was captured by the English, the total population numbered only 1,500 persons. Of these, 350 dwelt in New Amsterdam city proper. Some of the residents listed in Joyce D. Goodfriend's book are Surgeon Hans Kurtztide, brewer Isaac de Forest da Silva, cooper Jan Bestridi, glacier Evert Ducking, merchant Johannes de Peyster from Prizren in Poland, baker Lawrence van der Spiegel, mirror, a Jewish specialty like crystal, blacksmith Cornelius Klopper or Cooper, tailor Boyle or Rolfson, Mason Paulus Turk, Sephardic surname. Many Sephardic Jews took refuge in the Ottoman Empire after the Inquisition began, and sword cutler Hendrik Bosch. Goodfriend, in her account of early New Amsterdam, lists many names we will return to shortly. Let us introduce them briefly at this time, beginning with Balthasar Bayard, a brewer, and his brother Nicholas. Balthasar married Marie Lockermans Locke in 1664, daughter of a wealthy merchant. Abraham de Lannoy, already discussed as a Sephardic surname, had two sons, Abraham and Peter. Mention is also made of Albertus Ringo, shoemaker, Peter Jansen Messier, carpenter, Dennis Eisensen, another carpenter who arrived in 1659, Jacob Danielson, Jacob Maurits Moses, ship captain, Geronimus Eben, a merchant from Hamburg, another safe haven for Sephardic Jews at the time, right? Hey, Hamburg, Jacob Abrahamson, Cooper, Martinus Hoffman, who resided in Kingston, Jamaica, Tunis, Cray Cornelius Berenson, measurer, Peter Jacob Marius, trader, Simon Jensen Romian from Rome, Allard Anthony Isaac de Peyster or Pazer, merchant, Isaac Brazier, carpenter, and Jacob Marine Groen or Green, silversmith. Most of these surnames appear in the genealogies published on the internet as Dutch Jews, and many are in the family tree of the Jewish People's Project. Again, these are, mainly Sephardic Jewish people of Spain and Portugal. They made their New Amsterdam over there as the Inquisition had made them flee. Let's not forget that, people of color. Around 400 Huguenots, all right? Moors, let's just say straight up, they became known as Huguenots. We read that earlier, right? Moors. Around 400 Moors immigrated to New York around 1680. Numbering among them were Francois Bouquet, Joshua David, Eli Boudinot, whose grandson would be elected the president of the First Continental Congress, all right? The first presidents before George Washington. That's a future video. There was like, I believe, 7 or 8 of them, right? We're going to go over that. Here's one of them, Eli Boudinot. He was a Moor. So yes, people of color, whose grandson would be elected the president of the First Continental Congress and whose mother was Marie Sueri, example Suero, of Marans, Unis, France, Suzanne Papin or Papo, Andrew Laurent, Marie Luca, John Magnan, Jacob Radier, Jael Arnauld, and the Tangi from Tangier. Lafon and Gracilier families. Auguste J was a very successful merchant from the crypto-Jewish stronghold La Rochelle, France, which lent its name to New Rochelle, north of New York. Like KB, Gimbal, Hamel, and V, the letter J was probably adopted as an expedient Kinui or secular name. The original Shem, Kahodesh, or sacred name could have been Judah or Jacob. It says here, Jews labeled as such. Only 3 residents, all with Portuguese or Spanish names, are publicly identified as Jews during this period. Joseph Bueno, the good name. Merchant, Isaac Rodriguez Marquez or Marx, merchant, and Joseph Isaac Butcher. Other Jews had successfully adopted Dutch surnames, customs, and associates to better blend with the populace. All right, they took on the names. The lives of persons who were publicly branded as Jews were difficult in New Amsterdam, a fact which no doubt stimulated many to practice their religion in private. Van der Sea describes this situation as an extension of the attitude that the Dutch had toward openly Jewish persons in Holland. Remember, Jews had received permission to establish the first congregation in 1605, barely 35 years before. The Amsterdam Jewish community was not loved, but was at least left in peace. They were protected by their wealth. Oh, they got the money, so let's keep them around. The West India Company, struggling to stay afloat, needed Jewish money badly. All right? Jews had been free to go to Brazil. We're talking about Sephardic Jewish people. To call them back now would be unreasonable and unfair, especially because of the considerable loss sustained by the Jews in the taking of Brazil. The Quirin, the 19th, piously wrote to Stuyvesant, adding more honestly. Remember, that's what they called themselves, the 19 in documents. And also of the large amount of capital which they have invested in shares of this company. The letter was sent on April 26, 1655, and on its receipt, Stuyvesant had to hastily revoke a resolution handed over to the burgomasters of New Amsterdam by Van Tienhoven on March 1st, in which the Jews in New Amsterdam were ordered to depart forthwith. Permission to stay did not mean that Stuyvesant considered them normal burghers. The company had instructed him to give the Jews the same privileges as they have here in Amsterdam, only as far as civil and political rights are concerned, without giving the said Jews a claim to the privileges of exercising their religion in a synagogue. But Stuyvesant thought even that too generous. Van der Zee continues. From the start, he obstructed the Jews in every way possible. When two of them leased houses in December 1655, he tried to stop them, and at the same time forbade them to trade on the Delaware River and at Fort Orange. On November 29th, the Jews petitioned him not to restrict their activities, but Stuyvesant rejected the request for weighty reasons. A new petition followed in March 1656, in which the Jews reminded the governor of the rights the company had granted them. They told him they were willing and ready to contribute according to their means, if they were allowed to enjoy the same liberties as other citizens. Listen to this. This is Jews going through this, all right? They're getting discriminated against, right? Remember, these are people of color. And this Stuyvesant might be like more into the Catholic thing, right? That's why he's going after them. Stuyvesant turned to Amsterdam for advice, and on June 14, the Lord's Director made it clear that the Jews were indeed free to trade and purchase real estate, all right? Because it was the same people over there in charge. They were highly displeased with the general and told him reprovingly, "We wish that you had obeyed our orders, which you must always execute punctually and with more respect." They were mad at him for discriminating against their people because they were the same people in charge over there in Amsterdam. He said, "How could you treat our people like that?" A number of restrictions were upheld. However, no Jew could be employed in any public service, nor were they allowed to have open retail shops. So you hear how they're discriminating on these people, right? They could exercise their religion only within their houses. Stuyvesant added to this list of company instructions one of his own. He refused Jews the right to join the militia of the city. Instead, they were to pay an exemption tax of 65 strivers a month. The Jews were not resentful, and they were more generous than the governor. When in the aftermath of the Indian massacre in 1655, the burgomasters asked for a contribution for the strengthening of the city wall, now Wall Street. All right, listen to this. Now Wall Street. What city wall they're talking about in 1655? Who's funding this? Sephardic, these people of color. Who built Wall Street? Who built Wall Street? 5 Jews gave 500 guilders between them. What Jews? Sephardic Moorish people. People from Spain and Portugal. Very dark complexion, swarthy people. Built Wall Street. 5 Jews gave 500 guilders between them and 12 of the total. This might have influenced Stuyvesant's decision shortly afterward to grant them a concession he had refused a year earlier. They were now allowed to have their own burial place outside the city at what is now Chatham Square in Chinatown, a mile from the wall. These restrictions continued into New York era, as Camden makes clear. By 1706, when the Jews of New York City prepared a kind of constitution for their own regulation, they enjoyed economic as well as some civil rights. They voted. if no one challenged them to take a Christian oath, and conducted public worship. In 1718, they won the privilege of naturalization through special acts of the assembly, a privilege that enabled them to own land. By 1727, they seem to have won full suffrage, and by 1731, when there were some 75 Jewish families in New York, they had dedicated the first synagogue to be constructed as such in British North America, had erected a separate school building, and had been allowed to expand their burying ground. At the election of 1737, however, their right to vote was successfully challenged. William Smith Sr. played heavily upon anti-Semitic prejudices and persuading the legislature to disallow Jewish votes for assemblymen, as well as Jewish testimony in court. Between 1748 and 1761, these privileges were regained, and the Constitution of 1777 finally gave Jews, as well as Roman Catholics, full political equality. That document was to be a genuine benchmark in New York's movement toward complete secularization. It declared that the free exercise and enjoyment of religious profession and worship without discrimination or preference shall forever hereafter be allowed within this state to all mankind. Thus, the Jews were not fully enfranchised in New York until after the Revolutionary War. By the 1730s, Ashkenazi Jews, all right, now listen to this, right? This whole time, and I've been trying to explain to you, this whole time it was mainly Sephardic Jews, not Ashkenazi. But by the 1730s, Ashkenazi Jews from Poland and Germany had begun to outbalance their openly Jewish Sephardic brethren. They started kind of getting more populous and kind of taking on their business and all that and their trades and all that. Good Friends writes, listen to this is history. The Jewish immigrants who joined their co-religionists in New York City during the first 3 decades of the 18th century assembled from places all over the map of Europe, as well as in the West Indies. In 1712, Anglican chaplain John Sharp cited as one of the advantages of New York City that it is possible also to learn Hebrew here as well as in Europe, there being a synagogue of Jews, and many ingenious men of that nation from Poland, Hungary, Germany, and Ashkenazim outnumbered Sephardim among these newcomers, 1700s, like newcomers, and by 1728 they formed a majority of the congregation Shedef Israel. You see how they flipped it. So before the 20s, 28, it was, the Sephardic Moorish people. Most of the Jewish immigrants engaged in some form of retail trade, but Valentin Campanelle was a butcher and Uriah Hayam was a tallow chandler. Two merchant families that put down roots in the city in the early years of the 18th century came to tower over more recent arrivals, the Franks family and the Gomez family. Jacob Franks, whom we will encounter in the Pennsylvania chapter, was an Ashkenazi Jew born in England. He settled in the city about 1708 and commenced his mercantile career. He prospered, attaining high status in the city and served in a number of important offices, with property assessed at 140 pounds on the 1730 tax list. He ranked in the top 5% of the economic elite. The grandee Luis Moses Gomez occupies an unusual position in colonial American history. Born in Spain in 1660, he escaped the Spanish Inquisition to live in France and England, where he was a known Judaizer. After spending several years in the West Indies, he moved to New York City about 1703. There, he purchased 6,000 acres of land on the Hudson River at a spot where several Indian trails converged. See what he did? And this is a Sephardic Jew, right? It's a person of color. What did he do? He purchased 6,000 acres in New York of land on the Hudson River, a spot where several Indian trails converged. That was their road, later known as Jews Creek. He built stone houses with walls 3 feet thick into the side of the hill, continuously occupied for more than 300 years. Gomez Mill House is today the oldest surviving Jewish residence in North America. All right, that was a person of color from Spain. In 1729, Gomez used the right of British citizenship that had been granted him by Queen Anne to purchase a plot of land in Lower Manhattan that would become the first cemetery of congregation of Shedef Israel. In 1730, the taxable property of retailers Louis, Mordecai, Daniel, and Moses Gomez totaled 305 pounds. The eminence of the Gomez family is illustrated by the fact that a special enclosure of the synagogue gallery was reserved for the Gomez women. The social and political restrictions on Jews in New York pressured many to abandon public identification with their faith and marry into ostensibly Christian, though in not a few instances, crypto-Jewish families. Kamen, for example, declares the Sephardic Jews intermarried with Gentiles. All right, they did what? They intermarried with who? With Gentiles, to such an extent that by the century's end, a discrete Jewish community barely survived. When Philip Franks married Oliver de Lancey in 1742, her family was shocked and disappointed. Realistically, however, the number of eligible young Jewish men was small, and Mother Abigail Franks had previously expressed a low regard for most of them. In succeeding years, the union of Christian with Jewish families became increasingly common. All right? And don't just think white people here, okay? Don't just think they're talking about pale-skinned people here. All right? We will argue below that what appear to be Jewish Christian unions often are, in fact, Jewish or crypto-Jewish marriages. See, it's not always what it appears. Jewish descent and inheritance patterns were maintained in private, though they were invisible in public. I've seen that in the genealogy. As the further back you go, you start seeing all these Hebrew names, and they marry other families who have Hebrew names, even though none of them are declared Jews, right? So that's what they're talking about here, crypto-Jewish families in New York. Let us take a closer look at the families believed to be crypto-Jewish and their points of origin. One group arrived from the Palatine region of Germany in 1710, the Palatines, while the other majority were directed onward to Livingston Manor on the Hudson River. A few made their way to New York City, including Hans Ure Bloom, John Rubel, and John Peter Sanger. Sanger would open the first printing press in the colony. Peter Van Dyke and Myers, both famed silversmiths, became investment bankers in New York City. There were also the prominent family of Daniel Kizam, Arabic, in Queens, and the Lot Hebrew family of Kings County. Openly Jewish Uriah Hendricks, or Enriquez, became a leading copper, brass, and iron manufacturer. In Albany during the 1730s, Baron Sanders, after Alexander, traded with Suriname, Curacao, Jamaica, Barbados, and Antigua, all Sephardic outposts in the Caribbean, all right? Sephardic, not Ashkenazi. On the Upper Hudson, John Henry Lydius, the masculine form of the Sephardic Greek Lydia, was a large-scale fur trader during the 1730s, but surely the primary players were four families that from 1675 to 1725 provided the principal leadership for the New York commercial community. These were the Phillipses, the Van Cortlands, the Delanceys, and the Schulers. A strong case can be made that each of these families was Jewish in private practice, if not in public perception. The Phillips family, Frederick Phillips, the founder of the Phillips family in the colonies, arrived in New Amsterdam about 1650 as the official carpenter and builder of the Dutch West India Company. Before long, he extended his activities and became a trader with the Five Nations. With the who? With the Indians. The Iroquois, is that what we're talking about? In a few years, he had risen to pinnacle of success as a merchant. His commercial career was aided by both his first wife, Margaret Hardenbrook, and second, Catherine Van Cortlandt, whose families were also active in the Indian trade. By 1674, he was listed as the richest man in New York colony. His worth of 80,000 guilders far surpassed that of his nearest two rivals, both of whose estates combined were valued at 50,000 guilders. By the turn of the century, when Frederick's only surviving son, Adolf, took over the family businesses, records show that the family owned in whole or part at least 7 ships: the Abigail, Diamond Eagle, Phillipsburg, Charles, Hopewell, and Mayflower. All right, they owned what? Who owned what? The Mayflower. Who owned the Mayflower when the Pilgrims came? They brought their people over, their own people, the Phillips family. All right, the Phillips family, Sephardic Jewish people. The lasting partnership with Stephen Delancey, all right, the Mayflower. When Adolf took charge, there was an increase in trade with the West Indies and greater variety in both exports and imports. Phillips exported to the West Indies and to other mainland colonies growing number of New York products, especially flour, lumber, and horses. He also engaged in the Guinea trade, which entailed importation of slaves from the west coast of Africa. All right, dodge the hijack, right? They added it because they're going with their, out of Africa theories. Remember, they're just going into the history of these people. They haven't done the genealogy of these so-called Negroes that are supposed to be brought in to see if they were really coming from West Coast Africa, and if they were they really just coming from Cape Verde and the Madeiras and the Canary Islands and Saint Thomas, where there was many, many Moors and Sephardic Jews too, and Indians. So, something we got to definitely pursue. There's no source for that part of it. Now it says, for example, he received a shipload, 128 slaves on March 29, 1718. From about 1712, trade with the West Indies and the Madeira Islands began to loom large, right? Madeiras Island, like I just said, and great quantities of rum and wine were imported. As previously discussed, such trading patterns are strong markers of Marrano converso connections, all right? Marranos, who had the ships, who was doing all that. Continuing, it says here, the Van Cortlands. The founder of the Van Cortland family, Olaf Stephen Van Cortland, came to New Amsterdam in 1638 as a soldier in the service of the Dutch West India Company. He was appointed to the post of Commissioner of Cargoes and soon became the owner of a brewery. Also launching other ventures such as the Indian trade. In 1642, he married Aniek Lukermans, a woman of ample means. By 1645, he was serving as a member of the councils advising the Dutch governors. He twice held the post of burgomaster of New Amsterdam. In 1674, Van Cortlandt was described as the fourth richest man in the colony, his worth estimated at 30,000 guilders. He had two sons, both of whom served as his partners in business affairs. Stephen Van Cortlandt married Gertrude, the sister of Peter Schuler. Jacob married Eva de Vries, an adopted daughter of Frederick Phillips. This pattern of endogamy should ring familiar. Early Van Cortlandt shipping activities were markedly similar to those of Frederick Phillips. The two families jointly owned a ship named the Beaver. Jacob Van Cortlandt was especially active in the provisioning trade between the West Indies islands and mainland towns. His accounts for the period from 1699 to 1705 indicate that most of his trade was to Jamaica, Curaçao, Barbados, while other ports to call include Suriname, Madeira, Amsterdam, and London. Once again, a pattern of converso Marrano trading partnerships is evident. It says here, Delancey. New York's third great mercantile family was founded by Stephen Delancey. All right, he fled Caen in France as a Huguenot refugee in 1681. Delancey, these were Moors. All right, the Delancey, famous mercantile family of New York, founders, the Delancey were Huguenots, a refugee in 1681, going first to the Netherlands and then on to London. In March 1686, when he was 23 years old, he set sail to New York, arriving in June 1686 with a nest egg of 300 pounds from the sale of a family jewels. He rose rapidly in New York City society, partly no doubt because of his marriage to Anne Van Cortlandt, daughter of Stephen Van Cortlandt. In 1699, Governor Bellomonte accused Delancey, along with other leading New York City merchants, including both Frederick and Adolph Phillips, of trading in pirated goods smuggled from Madagascar. The African pirates of this period were almost exclusively conversos and moriscos, Moors, moriscos, all right? Who was these pirates? Moors, all right? Conversos,
Sephardic Jews and Moors. These were the pirates, the so-called African pirates. By 1711, Delancey was prosperous enough to speculate in cocoa to the extent of some 3,000 pounds. He also purchased wheat and flour and was active in the Indian trade. From the beginning of the 18th century, his name appears frequently on shipping records showing that he received wine from Madeira, rum and European goods from the West Indies, and European goods from England. He was accounted as one of the richest men of the province. James Delancey, the eldest son of Stephen and Anne Van Cortlandt Delancey, was born on November 27, 1703. Again, remember, these are Huguenots, these are Moors, the Delanceys, and grew up in a patrician comfort, being groomed for leadership in accordance with the family's expectations, as was the case with William Byrd of Virginia. His father sent him to England at the age of 18, where he entered Cambridge in October of 1721. Remember, William Byrd, he described the Indians as mahogany with their long braided hair, right, when he was over there doing his line, right, the border line. William Byrd. So he was sent to the same kind of lifestyle. He read law for a brief term at Lincoln's Inn, returned to New York at the end of 1725, and prepared to take his position in society. Upon admission to the New York bar, he began his practice with 3,000 pounds gift from his father. At the age of 26, he was appointed member of the Governor's Council, and by 1731, he was commissioned second judge of New York Supreme Court. Now it says here Schuyler. The Schuyler, example, scholar family was founded by Philip Petersen Schuyler, who settled at Albany about 1650. From modest beginnings as the son of an Amsterdam baker, he chose to concentrate on commerce in the New World, trading first with the Indians and helping to regulate that trade as one of the Albany Indian commissioners after 1656. His son Peter extended the family interest by means of two prudent marriages. First to Angel T. Van Schack of the Albany merchant family, and secondly to Marie Van Ressenlauer, granddaughter of the powerful patron of Ressenlaerswyck. Peter Schuyler became the dominant figure in the Albany fur trade. Now remember what patron meant. These were people who had like 20 Sephardic families, Moorish families, and they had brought over and they got like 1,000 acres. Remember? That's the patron, el patron, the boss. His preeminence was based on two main factors. By learning their language and respecting their traditions, he gained a position of influence with the Iroquois, equaled by no other European man until William Johnston came to Albany County in 1738. They called him by his first name, Cuidor, in their language. The other source of Schuyler's power was his political connections. He was mayor of Albany from 1686 to 1694 and a member of the governor's council from 1692 until 1720. He emerged as a strong advocate of the interests of Albany, the fur traders, and the Indians. It seems to have been these commercial and political roles that led to his involvement with the Philippe's, Van Cortlandt's, Delancey group in the early decades of the 18th century. Kathy Metson, who has studied these trading families, lists the London factors they did business with. These include several Jewish surnames, Starkey, Blackall, Ludwig, as well as the Mikaja Perry, the factor for William Byrd of Virginia. Morris and Livingston. Two more dynastic families of New York possess an eminence streaming from land and agriculture rather than trade. The Morrises and Livingstons, we propose they too were crypto-Jewish. The first member of the Morris family in the New York colony was Richard Morris, a captain in Oliver Cromwell's army who sought safety abroad with the Restoration. His son Louis was less than a year old when orphaned. For 2 years, the child was entirely in the hands of strangers until paternal uncle Louis Morris arrived from Barbados in 1674 to assume responsibility for him. When the uncle died in 1691, Louis inherited the family's lands and estates. The Westchester County tract of around 3,000 acres was made into the manor of Maurice Sania in 1697. The other estate, 3,500 acre Tinton Manor, was located in Monmouth County, New Jersey. From 1691 to 1710, Morris concentrated on his activities in New Jersey colony, becoming a prominent member of its council. During those years, he resided on his Monmouth County estate, which had an iron foundry and 60 or 70 slave workers. Once Robert Hunter became governor of New York and New Jersey in 1710, he shifted his attention to New York, where he was appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1715. Remember, this is the North, right? And they're talking about slave owners, right? In the North, right? Morris also had a seat in the New York Assembly. He assumed the New Jersey governorship in September of 1738. Morris's son, Lewis Morris Jr., became the second proprietor of the manor of Morrisania. Morrisania. It was not until after the middle of the 18th century that any member of the Morris family entered directly into a commercial career. This move occurred only when Lewis Morris III won a contract to provision William Shirley's Niagara expedition against the French in 1755-1756. The social apogee of the Morrises came with Governor Morris, the financier and rakish member of the Constitutional Congress of 1787, credited with authoring the words, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." All right, listen to that. The Livingston family offers an even more adumbrated exemplar of crypto-Judaism. The earliest form of this Scottish clan name is Levingston, or Levite town. The Levite town. Levingston, the Levite town. And a indication of the Jewish roots. They are considered archetypes of the landed gentry of New York, and the name appears among the glitterati and social directories to this day. The great estate they built in Albany County, Livingston Manor, the substantial family holdings they amassed in Dutchess and Ulster counties, as well as close ties forged with other Hudson Valley landowners, cemented their reputation as land barons. But the original Livingston to settle in New York was of humble origins. Robert Livingston was first and foremost a merchant. Only after making his mark in trade and politics at Albany did he successfully recast himself as an aristocrat. He was the son of a Scottish Presbyterian minister, forced into exile like many after the reinstatement of Stuart to Charles II as King of England. The family settled in Rotterdam, where Livingston learned Dutch and began his career as international trader. 3 years later, he decided to turn his attention to North American ventures. By 1674, he had immigrated to Albany, where his fluency in Dutch soon made him indispensable to the colonial government. He married Alida Schuler in 1679. By surname evidence, there are other New York residents who fall into the category of crypto-Jewish. These include Isaac Gabay, Hebrew treasurer, Abraham Juno, Jacob Decay, Hebrew letter, Lucas Santon, Hay, Hebrew letter, M. Solomon, Benjamin Balthasar, and Matthias de Hart, Cornelius Jacobs, Abraham Verplanck, Jacob Lucena, town in Spain, Nicholas de Meyer, John Barbary, Abraham de la Noy, Noy, remember, is Noah or Noé, Abraham Stats, Simon Gilde, Dirk de Wolf, emblem of the tribe of Levi, the Wolf, emblem of the tribe of Levi, Gerard Beckman, Moses Michael Hayes, Meyer, Hebrew Meyer, Pollock, Polish, and Caleb Heathcote. About the latter, Kathy Matson writes, Caleb Heathcote arrived in New York City in 1691. At the age of 26, and quickly established himself as a diversified trader with interest not only in English dry goods imported, but in the Antilles, Madagascar, and Madeira trade as well. From his profits in wine and other luxury imports, Heathcote purchased extensive city lots and an estate at Scarsdale, but he continued to spend most of his time in New York City, and his assessment of 640 pounds in 1695 was based upon his owning several warehouses and shops which he rented to other city merchants. All right, remember who the merchants are. One of the principal earmarks of crypto-Judaism is intricate and overlapping commercial relationships across families and countries. With regard to several of the families of interest, Madsen observes, I remember it's a key point because they're the ones who had the ports and the connections. That was their people who had all, so you had to be in the circle. You had to be in the club. So these New Yorkers, as she says, maintained close liaisons with four prominent partnerships in Amsterdam. A few colonists knew the bankers John de Neufville, example Newhouse, and son from London introductions, and John Huston had moved to Amsterdam after years of doing business in England. Daniel Crommelin and Son had been founded about 1735 after the firm's major partner, a Huguenot refugee from France, a Moor, had lived in both the West Indies and New York. Crommelin had facilitated and backed shipments between Amsterdam and New York since about 1720, doing business as the Holland Trading Company with bankers like Willenix, Ten Broek, and Chamel Pennick. After 1755, the Dutch firm became a banking house, Crommelin and Soon. All right, remember Crommelin? Who's Crommelin? A Huguenot, Moor, a Moor. All right, his firm, Crommelin and Soon, which lasted until Crommelin's death in 1768. His son Robert kept commercial liaisons with New Yorkers over these years, and his daughters married New York merchants Gabriel Ludlow and Gulian Verplanck. John Ludlow, Dutch Jewish family. Gabriel's brother bought over 25% of his imports from agents of the Crommelin family in 1757. He exported over 5 times more to the Crommelin than to any English merchant. Levinius, Dutch Jewish surname. Clarkson, the fourth Dutch liaison, and the double Clarkson, and to be related to Charles Ludwig, a successful New York trader who'd returned to London after 1710. Levinius visited the Ludwig household and met many metropolis commercial elite. By 1736, he was prepared to join his uncle in Amsterdam, where they launched a vigorous export trade to New York that also involved an elaborate service in converting bills of exchange and extending credit. Occasionally, Clarkson imported New York goods and bills in Daniel Crommelin's name through his connection with Ludwig in London. Clarkson also secured goods and credit for Francis Goelet, a Huguenot, right? Another Huguenot, right? Moore, Francis Goelet, Moore, that's a Moore. Anthony Rogers and the Rosenfeld brothers in New York until the end of his career. He also held on to his portion of a 5,000-acre colonial estate that had been granted to his relatives, the Van Cortlands. Continuing, it says, note the reoccurrence of London and Amsterdam firms in combination again of Huguenot or Moors, right? English and Dutch commercial partners. Clearly, despite language and geographic differences, there was an overreaching ethnic bond that permitted these relationships to be established and maintained. Similarly, Rodrigo Pacheco, a Spanish crypto Jew, and James Alexander, a Scottish crypto Jew, they're all the same, they're family, formed a joint venture and worked together. You get it? But when they told us history, they told us, oh, a Spaniard and a Scottish guy created this company, right? But they're both what? Crypto Jews, people of color, same family, Moorish people. During the 1730s, they were friendly rivals aiming to capture a prominent dry goods position in New York market. They regularly discussed their cargoes. According to Madsen's research, rice last year did very well at London, but prices have been declining and it would sell better at Lisbon. Pacheco predicted in 1732, in order to get the rice, not a commodity that New Yorkers grew, to its destination, Alexander outfitted the ship Albany to sail with flour, bread, pork, peas, tar, staves, and other goods to Jamaica, buy sugar, rum, lime juice, Negroes. What Negroes, right? Who are these so-called Negroes? And cash to the value of about 800 pounds. Then to sell the New York goods and proceed to South Carolina to acquire a full load of rice for Lisbon. According also to Madsen, the firm of Perry and Ludlow and the businesses of John Harris Kruger and Henry Livingston also depended on family connections. It was a network embracing the Curaçao merchants Telemon Kruger. All right, these are Sephardic people and Moorish people that were in Curaçao. Philip Livingston, John Collier, Mydert Lansing, Nicholas and Isaac Gouverneur, and members of De Peyster, Duckings, Bowen, Lefferts, and Ramson families, Cornelius Courtright and Nicholas Kruger had counting houses in St. Croix. David Beckman, whose older brother Gerard lived in New York, became a sugar planter there. William Livingston and Peter Van Brugh Livingston went to the West Indies as young men to learn the business before they started out on their own account in New York. Alexander Hamilton, all right, again, Alexander Hamilton was a swarthy West Indian boy, right? Remember, he was Huguenot and Sephardic Jewish and American Indian. He was what? A clerk for the West Indian firm of David Beckman and John Harris Kruger. Remember, Kruger's who he had gone under apprenticeship, I believe. Such trading and financial relationships can be interpreted as presenting the classic model of community of Iberian diaspora Jews. These particular families capably established themselves in the New World through their connections in Amsterdam, right? You guys see the bigger picture? You see how even though they were going through this persecution, they made it happen in Amsterdam, and once they got to Amsterdam, they got control of the trade, like big time, right? These Iberian diaspora Jews and Moors, they did very well to establish themselves in the New World. Genealogical analysis. The family annals of the Morrises and Livingstons illustrate many of these presented thus far. The Morris family of New York and New Jersey was one of the most affluent and powerful in colonial America, producing governors, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and state Supreme Court justices. Supportive of our thesis are the murky origins of the family. What is known is that the Morrises were likely from Wales, a large source of Sephardic immigrants to the colonies, right? They were coming from where? From Wales. They weren't English. That they favored the given name Lewis, the Hebrew tribal name of Levi. That they carried a Sephardic Moorish surname, Moorish. That they spent considerable time in Barbados as sugar planters and refiners. All these characteristics point to Sephardic origins. Okay? Richard Morris married a woman named Sarah Paul, fairly obviously of Polish Jewish origin, in Barbados. In the next generation, we see marriages to Norris, Arabic for light, and Isabella, Spanish first name, Graham, often Jewish. Here begins that revealing pattern, cousin to cousin marriages. Wesley and West's parents become numerous by the fourth generation. The Stats family provides 2 consecutive wives for the Lewis Morris by the late 1700s. Further, Sarah, Isabella, and Euphemia become concentrized as daughters' names, creating a publicly evident link to Mediterranean ancestry. In this generation also, 2 Jewish surnames enter the family, Ashfield and Anthill. There is an additional marriage to a Graham cousin. By the 5th generation, the Woolley, Anthill, and Ashfield families have re-entered the Morris line as cousin marriages, and the Lawrence family has provided 2 marital partners. The given names Isaac, Jacob, and Rachel have proliferated in the family, right? And this is what I was saying I find when we do genealogy. Lewis Morris Ashfield has married his cousin Ann Morris, and Vincent Pierce Ashfield his cousin Sarah Morris. Not to be outdone, Sarah Anthill marries her cousin John Morris, while John Anthill marries 2 consecutive Colden sisters, Margaret and Alice, whose children then marry a Van Horn cousin and William Davies, who bears a Jewish surname and operates a mercantile business. Toward the close of the genealogy, Morris descendant John Graham marries a cousin, Julia Ogden, as does fellow Morris descendant Amos Borden in the person of Rachel Woolley. Moorish descendant Thomas Lawrence closes out the lineage by marrying his second and third wives, two Moorish sisters, Mary and Catherine. All right, he married sisters. A child of these unions then marries back into the Shee family, which entered the Lawrence lineage a generation earlier. And again, I find all this when I do the genealogy, trust me. It is hard to imagine a more stunning record of endogamy. As we have seen, the Livingston family comes from Scotland. The clan claimed to have traced its line back to a Saxon Thane who settled in Scotland later in the 11th century. Other sources give the Saxons' name as Levin. This appears to be the sort of bogus genealogy we have witnessed already with the Byrds and the Lees of Virginia, who also come to the colonies from decidedly middle-class origins in England, and who then, having made their fortunes, manufactured a glorious ancestry. First of all, Saxons did not bear surnames such as Levin. Second, it would make little sense for a Saxon aristocrat to make his way from England to Scottish borders simultaneously with the arrival of the Normans in those same regions. Third, the earliest form of the name was Levinston, as we have seen above, according to Livingston historian Cynthia A. Kierner. Robert's father, John, was a third-generation Presbyterian minister who could not accept the religious reimposition that accompanied the Stuart Restoration of 1660. During the English Civil War, he emerged as a leading Scottish advocate of radical ecclesiastical change. Livingston refused to subscribe to the oath of allegiance in Scotland and was banished. Not mentioned by Kierner is the fact that Robert's mother was Janet Fleming, an indication that she may have relates in Holland, Flanders. The family moved to Rotterdam when Robert was 9. At the age of 16, Robert began his trading career. He returned to Scotland for a year in 1672 and left it again to sail for Massachusetts. By 1675, he had resettled in Albany. As sketched previously, here he connected with the prominent Dutch landowners and merchants, serving as an estate manager and attorney. It is not explained by Kierner where or how his legal skills came to him. Soon he was acting as a fur wholesaler with Huguenot John Pinchon, a Moor, and Timothy Cooper, Huguenots, Cooper, Moors. He made a promiscuous marriage to the young widow of Nicholas van Rensselaer, Alida, Spanish for noble blood born. Schuler, according to Kearney, Alida was an accomplished businesswoman and fur trader, something quite unusual for a Dutch woman, but not for a Jewish one. Through marriage, Robert allied himself with the Van Cortlandt family, to boot since Alida's sister married Stephen Van Cortlandt. In 1685, Livingston was factored for London merchants Jacob Harwood and John Blackall, and by 1690 he had a half interest in the ship Marguerite, which carried slaves, sugar, and tobacco between Madagascar, Barbados, and Virginia. He had by then acquired enormous acreage in the Hudson Valley, building Livingston Manor. There he opened 2 mills and built several general stores. 2,000 Palatine refugees were settled at Livingston. What? How many? Not Africans. 2,000 Palatine refugees were settled at Livingston Manor to serve as the workforce. Again, not Africans. Who's working in this manor plantation? The Livingston Manor. All right. 2,000 Palatine refugees. A lot of those were people of color. Most of them were people of color. And these people would eventually be called so-called Negroes, and they told you these were African slaves they had brought to work there. And customers for the mills and stores and ironworks. All right. So they needed customers for the mills and stores and ironworks, bakery, and brewery were managed by Alida Livingston. The names of the Palatines settled at Livingston Manor are most informative. Listen to this. They include Simon Cohen, that's Jewish, right? Bastian Lesher, Harmy Kuhn, that is Coons, Johannes Meyer, Isaac Decker, Andries Franz Bruce, Baron Dutcher, German, James Barnett from Issachar, Israel Niffen, Charles Meade, Catherine Petrie, Nehemiah Purdy, Jacob Blatzer, Goldfall Worker, Samuel Coymans, Philip De Forest, Hendrik Dow from David, Cornelius Elsenstein, Ass Cattle, Abraham's Fonda, Hinchin Holland, Phillips Coons, Hebrew Anagram KNC, Omi Lagrange, Jacob and Thomas Messick, that is Masick, Hebrew Successful, Johann Pleas, Johann Musche, Jacob Schermerhorn, Martin Schoeck, Rohan Rosman, Abraham Slingerland, Anthony Ten Eyck, Jacob Van Allen, Robius Van Dusen, Arientijn van Voort, and John Yates, Hebrew Anagram. Obviously, most of these are not native German, but rather French, Dutch, and Ashkenazi Jews, all right? This is the workforce. These are the so-called slaves. In keeping with our thesis, the Livingston genealogy in America shows a pattern of marriage to crypto-Jewish Dutch families in the first generation, including the Vetch, Van Brugh, the Bigman, and Van Horn families. The Vetch descendants marry into the Bayard family, and the subsequent generations show an increased crypto-Jewish marital pattern, including Moffat, which is Moffat or Arabic, Arnold, Jewish, Coronel, Van Horn, and Simon. And one we see descendant of Philip Livingston marrying his close cousin Gertrude Van Rensselaer Schuler. In others, we encounter two Alexanders, De Peyster, Ten Broek, crypto-Jewish Dutch, two Huguenots, French and Lawrence, and Hoffman, Dutch Jewish. At a later stage, Robert Livingston of Claremont and his wife Mary Beckman have sons who marry two sisters, Eliza and Mary McEvers. And we see also Sheaf, likely Huguenot Moorish, and Mary Louise Valentine de Acesac, Castra Moreu, the latter very likely openly Jewish. Later, the descendants of Gilbert Livingston and Cornelia Bigman married two close cousins, a Van Cortlandt and a Van Rensselaer. The Huguenot Joy Darrell Moore and Dutchman, who seems also Jewish, Jacob Rudson. Still later, we see the descendants of Robert Livingston Jr. marrying two close cousins, a Livingston and a Schuler, and two likely Huguenot Jews, Morris Jews, Valentine Gardiner, and Mary Ann Leroy. Finally, we have William Livingston and Susanna French children, who marry close cousin John Livingston, and two more likely openly Jewish persons, John Cleve Simies and Catherine Kelta. All right, so we're almost done with this chapter. We're about to finish it right here. It says here, some residents of Livingston Manor. I remember they brought Palatines over there. Some of them included the Eusken Ashkenazis as the servants, all right? The names of the male Palatine Germans above 21 years old in Livingston Manor, New York, in the winter of 1710 and the summer of 1711 are provided by a collection of upwards of 30,000 names of German, Swiss, Dutch, French, and other immigrants in Pennsylvania from 1727 to 1776. Professor I. Daniel Rupp, second revised edition from 1876, Philadelphia. Says here, names, age, and occupation of those who accompanied the Reverend Joshua Courchertal in the spring of 1709. Joshua. The Reverend Joshua Courtelon, age 39. Sibylla Charlotta, his wife, 39. Their children, Beniga Sibylla and 10 Joshua and Susanna Sibylla. All right, so this is a list of the names here. I'm not going to read them all, but you guys can see. Take a screenshot or pause the video. Jacob, Michael, all right, Daniel, Isaac, Melchior, Peter, Johanna, Maria, Barbara, all right. As is clear from the surnames and given names above, the congregation of Reverend Korschenthal was probably Jewish in religious orientation, not Christian. It says here, Roosevelts, the crypto-Jewish character. Now, the Roosevelts, right, of New York becomes evident also when we examine the genealogy of the Roosevelts. Clyde Roosevelt entered the cloth business in New York and was married in 1682. He accumulated a fortune. He then changed his name to Nicholas Roosevelt. All right, who was really into the cloth business and clothing, silk? That was a Moorish Sephardic profession. He accumulated a fortune. He then changed his name to Nicholas Roosevelt. All right, so he changed his name from Clyde Roosevelt. You see that? To Nicholas Roosevelt. Of his 4 sons, Isaac died young. Nicholas married Sarah Solomons. Jacobus married Katharina Hardenberg. According to an old clipping from the Corvallis Gazette Times of Corvallis, Oregon, the Roosevelts were not a fighting but a peace-loving people, devoted to trade. Isaac became a capitalist. He founded the Bank of New York in 1790. The first Roosevelt came to America in 1649. His name was Claes Rosenfeld. He was a Jew. Nicholas, the son of Claus, was the ancestor of both Franklin and Theodore. He married a Jewish girl named Kunz in 1682. Nicholas had a son named Jacobus Rosenfeld. All right, these was their ancestry. Jews and Muslims in British colonial America, says here Roosevelt genealogy. Martin Van Rosenfeld, Claes Martensen Van Rosenfeld, Nicholas Rosenfeld. And these are the names: Johannes, Jacobus, Cornelius, Eliot, Jacobus, Isaac, James, Isaac, Franklin Delano. Remember Delano, I believe Delanoa from Noah. And it comes here, Clan Martensen Van Roosevelt, and it keeps going. You see all these Hebrew names. So like a tree right there they're showing us. What can we glean from the pages of Town and Country, America's foremost social register? As might be expected, the vast majority of names come from the higher ranks of New York society. Many are Dutch in origin. In support of our thesis, 16 out of 23 of the social lions can be placed in the column of possibly, but not necessarily, Jewish, while 1/4 of the rank and file socialites satisfy the required criteria. Among names harvested by such rough and ready means are Adams, Astor, Bigman, Belmont, Biddle, Carnegie, Chase, Cooper, De Acosta, De Vries, De Forest, De Paster, De Lancey, Firestone, Forbes, Fraser, Gardner, Geis, Gimbel, Howell, J, Lowell, Perdita, Phillips, Sayer, Van Forbes, Van Cortlandt, DuPont, Field, Fish, Gould, Livingston, Mellon, Morgan, Pulitzer, Rockefeller, Roosevelt, Vanderbilt in jail. We view these coincidences as suggestive of an untold story of ethnic origin in America's colonial past, in particular that of New York. In some, the blind spots of historians in the case of New York Colony are particularly glaring. New York's Sephardic antecedents are studiously ignored by textbooks and traditional accounts. All right, they leave this out of the textbooks. They don't teach this in school. They try to make these people into pale-skinned Christians or Catholics, English, right, or just Dutch, Europeans. They want us to have a different perspective. All right, they don't teach this. Even those specializing in Jewish history or genealogy don't even talk about this. The story of Jews in New York is almost exclusively focused on the first boatload of Brazilian Sephardic refugees who made landfall there and planted the Sheriff Israel congregation in New York City. These Jews, however, were poor and small in number. The group was immediately marginalized in the life of the colony. As we argue in this chapter, it is Scottish, Dutch, and Portuguese Jews or crypto Jews of means and positions of leadership who made the most important contributions to the planting and nurturing of the colony. Crypto Jews, Portuguese, right? Very dark-skinned people, Portuguese Jews. The New York became the financial capital of the world as well as intellectual nerve center for America is no accident, and it was because of the Sephardic Moorish people is what they're letting you know. It's no accident, okay? And that was chapter 5. We're going to go to chapter 6 in the next part of this installment of reading this book. I hope you guys enjoyed this. So again, this was chapter 5, New York Colony and the Dutch, British, and Jewish. This was the book Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America.